everyone. Welcome to FreeThinker's Fireside, where we put the human in humanists, one cozy chat at a time. My camera's crooked. That's better. Anyway, hi, my name is Helen, also known as Hell's Bells. This is a Saturday episode because some of the wonderful people I know are not American because they're smart. Anyway, I'm very, very excited to have Richard Gilliver this week. I'm so excited. So let's say hi to Richard. Hi, Richard.
Hello. I am not muted.
Hi,
I thought I
I'm
was
so
muted,
excited.
but I'm not. Hello. I'm looking forward to this. I'm actually a huge fan of this show. There's so many great people on here with such fantastic conversations.
Thank you.
I don't watch live because I'm usually asleep when it goes out live, but I do watch the replays, and I've just finished watching Cynthia's, who was on just the other day. Her recent episode I watched today. And her little boy, isn't he cute?
He is
Bless
so
cotton
cute.
socks.
Like, he is adorable. I'm like, I want to give him kisses and buy him a monster truck. I want to be a good Auntie Helen. Richard, for people that may not know who you are, please tell the people who you are, what you do as far as like activism and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm primarily an educator in skepticism and critical thinking, both in real life and on the interwebs. I produce the ACA's Talk Heathen show, which I'm very honoured to do because I've always been a fan of that show. That has always been my favourite ACA show. And I'm a huge fan of that. So when I got the chance to produce it, I was like, yes, I'll want to do that with both hands and both feet thrown fully in. And I sometimes host that as well. We've got a great lineup of hosts on there who I am so proud of. Every single one of them makes me proud every single week. Some great people on there. Some I've known for a long time as well, like Dr. Ben. Me and Dr. Ben have been working together forever and a day, since the dinosaurs probably. And so we, I've got, there's a
Dr.
great
Ben is
lineup.
one of my favorite people.
Yeah, he's great. He really is. And, we tend to talk, when Ben talk outside of the ACA, just via Messenger and stuff like that. And we usually talk about food. That's usually our primary source of conversation.
Me and Ben usually talk about D&D, so and wine. We talk about D&D and wine.
Yeah.
that is our friendship.
Yeah, if you see me doing this, by the way, I'm not a raging alcoholic. It's actually 9 p.m.
I always drink on my show because it's my show. I have a bourbon infused Malbec.
Nice.
It's very good. So
lovely. So yeah, that's basically it. I just kind of do the thing is about educating. This is that's frustrating for me, is that so many times when you're talking to people, when you're having debates with people, not just when you're talking to them, but when you're actually having debates with them, and you kind of mention the educating bit and that, what your aims are, because I don't like to just kind of throw shit out to people. I like to say, look, let's explore this subject. Let's look at, the epistemological framework that we're using here. And when people think that you're trying to educate them, they think that you're coming, a lot of the time, think you're coming from a position of arrogance, that you're saying that they're stupid and you're going to teach them something because you are better than them. And that is not the way that we kind of, well, certainly I, and a lot of people in this community who I know want to have conversations with religious people. Our aim isn't to talk down to people. It's simply to say that, that, look, we've got this subject, we're exploring it together, and let's explore it. Let's actually go into it. Let's strip it apart. And that's what I seek to do by educating people. It's not talking down to them. It's to say, here, let's build this scaffolding that we can use to prop up these ideas and see if this scaffolding holds the weight of what we're exploring. And that's the kind of idea behind it. It's not an I'm going to educate you, boy, kind of way. It's not meant kind of like that at all. And getting that across is sometimes one of the most difficult parts of having these conversations. Once you've got that past that hurdle of people thinking that you're trying to talk down to them, the conversations usually go pretty well. It's just surpassing that first hurdle, which sometimes can be a biggest part of the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, like, engaging in this space has its own, like, because like when I have conversations with people, like on TikTok and stuff, I'm not there to like say like I'm so much smarter than you are. Let me bequeath upon you my atheism knowledge, sir. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm like, I want to talk to people that think differently, because even if I don't agree with them, I can entertain a thought and like take on a perspective that is not my own, and that one helps me empathize with other people. And also too, like, what can we agree on? Like, are there moral values we can agree on? Cool. All right, now let's have a discussion of where those morals come from, and then have that conversation over like, well, what makes your moral framework, like, if we're talking about that, you know better than my moral framework. I think that's more important discussion. And if you're educating someone on a subject, like if you're like talking about fallacies, um, a lot of people don't know that stuff, and it's not because, and like, you just didn't know. It's not because you're stupid. It's because like there's plenty of things I don't know. Doesn't mean I'm less intelligent. It just means there's a lot of stuff I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that in religion they're taught this is right, this is right, this is right, and any pushback against that can feel insulting.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that, like I say, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles we have to face in this community is talking to people. It doesn't help either that we have this thing called social media, and a lot of the people in the atheist community don't help when they go kind of balls deep into shouting at people and being aggressive with them, and kind of giving religious people the impression that we're all like that. There's so many times where a lot of what I do as producer of Talk Heathen is going onto the social media and trying to kind of talk to people and invite them to the shows. And there's so many times where theists say, why would I call you when all you're going to do is shout at me and say I've got a sky daddy and insult me? And it's so much of my work on those platforms is saying to people, that's not what's going to happen on our show. That's not the way we
No,
talk to
like,
people. We have conversations with people. We don't talk at people.
and because like I don't want to yell at people. Like, I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to. Because like, one, we know that if we start yelling at people, you can't get them to think about things. Because one, emotional brain, your logical thinking is just going to get turned off anyway. So and then you're just going to dig your heels in, because like if I had a position that was wrong, but someone starts yelling at me and telling me my position is wrong, I'm just going to dig my heels in, because you're not actually engaging with the subject and looking at it from an objective standpoint. You're just making the person feel bad for having that perspective. And I'm like, unless you're a bigot, like, that's one thing I have zero tolerance for. Unless you're a bigot, I want to have a conversation with you that's going to be productive, but also at the same time, I think everybody's got their limits, and that's because I'm a person, you know. But I think that we in this new atheism movement are starting to see more of the nuance, rather than like religious people, have mental illness, or they believe in a fairy tale, or they or they don't believe, but they think it's like a form of like taking power, or just following a crowd or whatever. Like I think more now we're trying to figure out the motivations of why people believe what they believe, and helping them kind of have a top down perspective of it, rather, and taking on a different perspective. Because even if you can deconstruct and still be a believer, you just might deconstruct the religion or how you were taught about that particular belief.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, and I think, when I about 15 years ago, I think because I've been doing this a long, long time, and about 15 years ago, I kind of stopped doing this in the British community because I found a lot of British atheist kind of groups or movements were kind of just parroting these kind of arguments that they'd heard from Dawkins or Sam Harris. And I found it frustrating that there didn't seem to be any kind of good conversations going off in the kind of in the real world where at that time I was having these conversations. There
Mhm.
didn't seem to be a lot of good conversations going off, good points being made by the atheists, and I kind of took a step back for a couple of years and just concentrated on the kind of scriptural study and stuff I was doing at the predominantly Buddhism and Islam at the time, uh,
Mhm.
doing kind of throwing myself into that. And it wasn't until I kind of came across the Americans who were doing it, people like Matt Dillahunty and that, who I thought, these guys are saying, these guys are having the conversations that I want to be having and I was having before the British community started just becoming parroting. I still to this day have kind of a pushback against anybody who says the flying spaghetti monster because I heard it that much just thrown out there as a gotcha argument from the atheist side that it just without any real kind of substance to back any other argument up, that I just got bored of hearing it. And then I heard this stuff from your side of the pond, and I thought these are actually coming up with good arguments. These guys are coming up with good arguments. They've got a good take on it. They actually understand what they're saying rather than just parroting what people like Dawkins and Harris have said. And that really reinvigorated me to kind of get into the online kind of side of it. I don't want to talk about this too much because we've talked about my biography a million times before on various shows. So I
Well,
don't really want to go into that side of it. But it really did kind of, that's what gave me the push to do the online stuff.
right. Well, I think also too, that like like if you're using the flying spaghetti monster as like a gotcha, it's like, yeah, but the flying spaghetti monster isn't like the flying spaghetti doesn't have any power, and that's the difference. It's like it doesn't have the longevity, it doesn't have like a cultural influence, spiritual study as like a world religion does. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, you could, we can talk about like, is it reasonable to believe in a flying spaghetti monster? Cool. But also, too, the arguments people fall back on for like gods they're not going to, it doesn't have the same sort of impact to a believer. Which I don't. And you kind of have to meet people where they are. You can't just say like, "Gotcha!" Like, it's unreasonable to believe in a god. Haha! I proved it with my flying spaghetti monster argument. Fuck you! Like, that's
Yeah,
not how this works.
I
Like,
think it's got its time and its place, but my main thing about it was is not the argument particularly itself. It was just that people didn't really understand it and they were just
right.
parroting other people, and that for me is really frustrating. And you still see it across kind of atheist versus theist Facebook groups and things like that. You still see a lot of people from both sides just parroting arguments they've made. The amount of arguments I've had on TikTok with theists who throw something like the Kalam cosmological argument out because they've heard it and they don't actually understand the words that they're saying when they're making the argument. And you challenge them on an aspect of it, and they're like, "No, it's not that." And like, yeah, it really is that. No, it's not that. Like, yeah, it really is that. But they've never thought about it because they're not actually thinking about this argument for themselves. They've just heard some
No, they
YouTube philosophy bro saying here's one for the atheists, and they think that's brilliant. I'm going to use that as well, and they just kind of repeat it. And then as soon as they're challenged, it's kind of dead in the water time.
right. And I think that, and this kind of brings us to your subject, that you want to talk about. Like, I know we're going to talk about your book, but like, how do we have like a reasonable conversation that has to deal like what is really going on versus like what our perspective of what's going on. So since I brought up the subject of your book, why don't you talk about why you're writing it and what the subject matter is?
Yeah, the idea for it came about probably 3 years, maybe even 4 years ago. It's been a long work in progress, and I was nervous about even attempting to write a book at all, and I kind of threw the idea out to a couple of people in the community, Tangel Wright and Kenneth Leonard, people like that, and best name ever. I think were the first people and at that time it was super secret, and I'd like just gathered those three together and said, I trust you three a lot. I trust you to give me honest feedback. Do you think I could do this? And they were all like, yeah, go for it. So that's kind of what gave me the initial spark to do it. And then I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about what I wanted to write about. And then, excuse me, and then I had to figure out, because I didn't know what I was doing. I've never written a book before. I had to figure out how to go about it. And I reached out to our mutual friend, Dr. Richard Firth Godby here, who has written a book and had it published, and it's very successful. Who's written A Human History of Emotion. For anybody who doesn't know, go out and buy it because it's brilliant. And I love being on the
I bought it on.
channel.
I bought it on Audible.
I can't do this on the ACAC because it's a non-profit, so I can't promote people's stuff. But as we're not on a non-profit now, go and buy Richard's book. It is brilliant. And it's I kind of reached out to him, and Richard said, "Yeah, you know what? I'm doing some stuff. Let me kind of throw some ideas at you." And he was very kind, and he gave me a whole thing. He sent me a huge thing. And which kind of a template to use to kind of get me going, which I did. And I've done all the research for it now. All the research is done. Everything else is done. I'm actually at the point now where I'm writing the book, and it's so exciting. But it's about what it's actually about is dealing with it's kind of a two-pronged thing. The first and foremost, it's kind of in the spirit of Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World. It's a book about kind of skepticism and talking about skepticism and giving people kind of an overview of what that actually means and examples of what that means. The first two chapters talk about reality, what reality is, and truth, what truth is. Because these are things that are so often, again, stumbling blocks in conversations. And I think it's so important to understand. And I think that I've got a way of explaining it that no matter what your worldview is, we can agree that there is a best method of ascertaining what those two things are, which most people would agree on, whether you're a theist or an atheist, or you believe in ghosts or goblins or whatever you believe in. And then then the rest of the book is kind of just talking about different aspects of it. Like, it goes about social media, it goes on about email scams, it talks about religion, it talks about ghosts and clairvoyance. And it's got two case studies in there. One is a friend of mine went to visit a psychic and recorded it, and they very, very kindly let me use a transcription of that recording for the book in full. So other than changing the names of the people involved and any identifying features, it is literally the transcript in the book is literally the transcript of what happened. And then what I do is I break down the tricks of the trade that the psychic is using, what they're doing to kind of try and manipulate the conversation and all that kind of stuff. and it's really good. And that actually takes up, at this stage, before any kind of revision, it takes up 2 chapters of the book. Because what I do is in the first part of that 2 chapters, I give an overview of kind of psychics in general and the tricks that they use, and set the tone and explain what psychics use in general. And then the second part of it is actually dissecting this conversation which has been had, and referring back to these tricks that are being used, and saying, look, this is that thing I talked about there at the start of this chapter. This is where it's taking place in this actual conversation. So that's the first case study. The second case study forms the penultimate chapter of the book, and that is, and I've talked about this a little bit before on recovering from religion. That one is all about the resurrection account of Jesus. And even if we assume that, because a lot of these arguments we have with theists revolve around, well, the scholarship says that, no, the scholarship says this, the scholarship says that, they're bogged down. What it does is, it is going to explain a little bit about that as well, but the main thrust of it is going to be, even if we assume that this scholarship is the resurrection accounts are an accurate representation of what those people witnessed, psychology still shows that it more than likely didn't happen, because every single aspect of that account is some kind of non-psychological phenomena where the brain plays a trick on us. And it really goes into all that detail. It goes into the studies that have been done, and it really breaks it down from that angle. And they're the 2 big case studies in there, but I'd say they're the 2 main thrusts of the kind of book. Are the first 2 chapters setting down reality and truth, because that is used to refer back to throughout the rest of the book, and then these 2 case studies. And I'm not saying the rest of the stuff's filler, because it's not. And some people might find other aspects of it even more interesting. But for me, those 2 case studies are the kind of the most interesting parts of it, because that's what I do. I talk to people about what they believe and why they believe it, and I kind of break down why they believe things. So, and the other stuff is, it would appeal more to people who are into Carl Sagan's A Demon Haunted World, or Thinking Fast and Slow, and books like that. Because what the rest of it does is, it says, look, when we've got, when email scams happen, this is what is happening. When there's things being done on the internet, when there's scams on the internet, or when social media is bad for people, and it's trying to manipulate people, this is what is happening. And it breaks down a few myths about social media and things like that. So it's all interesting. But for me personally, those 2 big case studies are the real, like, fun bits of the book for me.
So, AJ, when are you going to finish the book?
Well, I've just started writing it. Like I say, it's been a long process. It's been something I've been thinking about for about 3 or 4 years, and researching. I've just started doing the writing. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to do 3 sample chapters in full, and then I'm going to send it to the publishers, and hopefully someone will pick it up. And
that's usually how it goes.
And
there's a whole process,
because I don't want to go down. One thing I don't want to do, and this is, this is just me. This is not snobbery. There's nothing wrong with doing this. I don't want to go down the self-publish route. I don't want to, be a pay for place publish thing. I want somebody to look at the book and say, this is worth us taking a punt on it. And that's what, because
plus you have all the money behind, and the legal representation and stuff that you can get through a publisher, which is really important. So
I mean, and that's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's what I want to do, and it's not the only book I'm writing. I'm also writing books. I'm writing a purely religious studies book, like, which has got nothing to do with skepticism at all.
We're all going to buy your book, Richard. We're all going to be first in line. I want a signed copy. That's my demand.
Yeah, I think we can manage that, Helen.
Yeah, thank you. I want a signed copy.
The other one I'm
like
writing,
whenever I buy books for my friends, I'm like, I better get a signature on that fucking thing. Otherwise, we can't be friends anymore.
I'm sure we can manage that.
I gave you money. I get a signature.
The other one I'm doing is a kind of religious studies book, so it's a completely different book. Completely different. It's just about, it's a book about the history of religion in the area where I live. But for me, I will bite it, Kyle. I will bite it. For me, that's equally as interesting, because it's that is kind of the stuff I'm interested in, the study of religion and the history of religion and why people believe. So, and that itself's going to be a fun little project for me to do. Completely different again, but that's kind of how I do. I've got a website. I've not published it. I've had it for about a year, but I've never published it because I want some stuff on there before I publish it, because I'm not prolific at putting stuff on there, and I don't just want it to sit there empty. And the first thing, the opening page of the website goes into this kind of conversation about how it's possible to study religion from a kind of impartial aspect, where I'm working with and speaking to religious people, and at the same time kind of critique religion and be an educator in skepticism and stuff. So I'd really spend a lot of time on that website, which I'm going to bring live at some point, just kind of going through, why I do both of those things, even though they seem contrary to each other.
Right. So that's wow. Like between the website and the book, and I'm not going to judge, because I started this channel because I wanted to have more interesting conversations, and because that's what we do. But like it's funny that, because like I worked in a psychic education center for 2 years as a project manager, and like once you see the tricks of the trade, you can't unsee it. That, because I think I told you that like I was teetering leaving any belief, but I was like, this was my last nail in the coffin moment. I'm like, okay, there's got to be something, Then I worked at an organization that sold bullshit, and then when you're booking guests and you're doing the practical everyday stuff of it, and then you go to events and you meet these people for who they are. You're seeing them as like a business partner rather than someone that you're coming to see their show. You just realize that they're just like everybody else. Some people sincerely believe they do have psychic powers, and other ones are just shysters, and you can tell. And then I was like, oh no, there's nothing. Everybody's trying to sell you some bullshit, whether sincerely or not, and that was like the end. Once you see the man behind the curtain, you're just kind of like, okay. I didn't like, that was like, it was the final nail in the moment, but COVID happened. So, and then that kind of took over all my focus for a little while. And then I got more involved with activism during that time. So because like it's not something like my stuff isn't so much about religion. Like woo woo weird shit is more my stuff. Like I'm like, I want to have more conversations about woo woo weird shit, because that's where people fall when they leave religion. They can go into like paganism and new age stuff, and holistic health that is going to open their chakras or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, I'm like, let's have more conversations about that.
I agree with you, and I think that's an important part. I also like to touch on. There's a religious studies theory called secularism, which came out. I think it was kind of the 60s, 70s. I might be wrong on the exact dates, and it kind of posited that we would get to a point where, when people stopped believing in these kind of organized religions, that we would all suddenly just become secular. And that's something I don't agree with. And it's fell out of favor as well in the kind of
Yeah.
religious studies community, because it's just not really accurate. But I think there's so many people who would go down that route of coming out of religion as you yourself did, and I remember that conversation, and I just happened to be wearing a Skeptic Hangout t-shirt, and we had that conversation on the old Skeptic Hangout podcast that we did, and
It's
you
in the doobly, guys. For Richard's channel, it's in the doobly doo. So if you haven't like and subscribe, go do that. But like and subscribe here first if you haven't already done so. But also go like and subscribe on Richard's channel and watch his content.
yeah
So he can put out new content.
that I think is something that is really important to know, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration. We had a guest on the non-profits ones. I'm not going to name the name, but we had a guest on the non-profits ones, and they were on with myself and Dr. Richard Firth, God be here, and we had a conversation about a subject, and we touched upon this idea of people coming out of organized religion and go into woo. And the guest that was on the non-profits with us said something. They're no longer on the non-profits. So, I've not seen them around for a while, so I don't know if they're still doing stuff, but I still don't want to name them when they're not here to defend themselves.
Right.
But they put forward this idea that, well, it's not so bad if you come out of religion and you still believe all this supernatural stuff. It's a lot better than being religious and believing in God and all that. And like me and Richard Firth, God be here, were like, no, that's not the right answer. That is not the right answer. That is equally as damaging, if not more so in some cases. So it's it's very important to kind of note that is something that's real for me where I live. That's really big as well, because not a lot of people are members. There are religious people in the area where I live, but there are not a lot of religious people in the area I live. But yeah, I think almost everyone, and I wouldn't even say 99.999. I mean, like literally almost everyone I know believes in ghosts or some kind of supernatural or some kind of vague supernatural. And it's that for me, where I live, is more of a problem than organized religion.
Right.
Because it informs so much bad thinking. It informs so much bad epistemology. And that, as we all know, is when people fall prey to that. That's where they're also prone to falling prey to email scams, to voting for the wrong people, for doing other harmful acts and not realizing they're harmful because they don't have that scaffolding to recognize where bad thinking is. And hello, Kelly. I love Kelly. And I think that's
don't tell him that because he'll get an ego. Don't tell me you love him.
Yeah,
he always thinks he's the best host at the ACA, so we don't want to inflate his ego. I see you, Kelly. I'm gonna call you out.
And Infidel's just said in the chat
I love you.
Beliefs breed bad decisions, and yeah, it absolutely nail on the head. Bad beliefs do breed bad decisions, and that is kind of what the book is trying to challenge. And one of the first things I put in the book is because I'm a philosophy person. I don't know if everybody knows this, but I'm a philosophy person.
You're a philosophy. Get out. I know that. But
a lot of people don't, because
we've been friends for a long time. So.
A lot of people who are who kind of just watch the shows and stuff, they kind of think the people with the big philosophy brains are the people who use big philosophy words. And that is something I try and kind of challenge and fight against. And I think, one of the things I put forward in this book is, when I'm talking about reality, is I am very, very clear to stress that this is only one idea about reality. The idea I'm proposing is only one idea about reality. There are other ideas about reality which are legitimate. They are legitimate. What I'm proposing in the book is not that this is the only right idea about reality, but this is the best idea we can agree upon given the information we have. It's the most likely to be true. And it's the same when I talk about truth. I'm not saying that because, I kind of go down the scientific uh, evidence route on it. And I'm not saying that that is the only way to assess truth claims. But what I'm
Right.
saying is that is the best way to assess truth claims. And I can demonstrate that that's the best way to test truth claims. And having a conversation with a religious person or someone who believes in these other kind of methodologies to test truth claims, I think I can pretty much persuade most people, even if they disagree with me, have a completely different worldview. I think I can persuade most people, given a reasonable conversation, that, yeah, actually, I agree with you. These are the best ways to test truth claims. And I've done it in practice. I've had these conversations with so many religious people who have turned around and said, yeah, we agree with you. This is the best way to ascertain what is true. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not pushing that there is only one way to find out what is true. There is only one way to have a consideration of what reality is. But it goes into lots of detail, especially on the realities front. I'm a big fan of this idea of consciousness conversations, and I don't have them anywhere near enough. But one thing you will know, if ever you see a conference, and this is a challenge to everybody who's watching this, if ever you see a conference on consciousness, about consciousness, look at who's in attendance, look at who the speakers are, because you will get people from my field of philosophy all the time. You will get neuroscientists, you will get psychologists, you will get people who study consciousness. But what you won't get, I don't think I've ever seen one at one of these things, is a kind of animal biologist who studies consciousness in animals. And that, to me, is criminal. That is something that really, really needs addressing, because those people are studying consciousness just as much as the psychologists are, as the neurologists are. The thinking about the consciousness just as much as the philosophers are. So why aren't they at these conventions? And and I go into this whole thing about how there is a reality out there which is the same reality that we all exist in, but the way we interpret reality is very much down to species.
Right.
Human beings have their way of interpreting reality, which is completely different to an ant or completely different to a rabbit. And in biology, this is called the Umwelt. It's the kind of sensory sphere of your particular
Right.
species. And it's so important when thinking about consciousness, and it's almost never, ever discussed at consciousness conventions. And I think that is such a crime. It's something I really, really want to push against and say, look, if we're going to, and it's really weird as well, because Nagel wrote that famous paper called, I can't remember exactly the name, the kind of what it feels like to be a bat, which is so often used, uh, uh,
Yeah.
within the odd problem of consciousness. And yet we're not inviting people who study the brains of bats and other animals to these things to have the
There was
conversation.
I watched a really interesting, this was a few months ago. I watched a really interesting, how it was just like how other animals hear sounds, like, and how they perceive the world. Like, the way that birds hear themselves, when they're communicating, which sounds very different than the way that we hear birds. So that's going to affect the way that, because they have the way that their brain processes the information, it works differently than the way that we process information. We process a lot of our information through language. Where birds, yes, they're communicating, but they're not the way that their perception of reality is just very different. And it's very interesting to me that people aren't considering that when they're talking about consciousness, because like my cats are conscious, they feel love and affection, and they need to feel safety, when they're scared and things like that. But they're not thinking like, they're not processing why they're scared. They just know they're scared, and then when I'm scared, this human comes over and pets me and talks to me very nicely, and I calm down. Like it's all emotional based. It's not like, logic based, but that's a form of consciousness. That is a form of how you're processing stimuli outside of yourself, and then how that stimuli is affecting you and your sympathetic nervous system. And I don't think there's enough conversations about that, because I would love to know how the consciousness of a bat works, like, and how they're perceiving reality. I think that because like I love science shit, because I'm always mind blown all the time when I learn something like that. I'm like, I didn't even consider it. Like when I watched, I think about like how birds hear sounds. I was like, oh my God. Like, I thought it was so cool. Like, I was like, I'm like, I never considered it, but like now my brain's changed and I learned some shit.
Yeah, I think that's I agree with you completely. I think it's brilliant. I think we need to kind of have these conversations. I think in doing so, we might find the hard problem of consciousness. So I'm in the minority, by the way, of philosophy people. The majority, 70% of philosophers, are people who think that there is a hard problem of consciousness. I don't think there is. And I think it comes about because of the way we think about the thing.
Okay. What is, so, for people, what is the hard problem of consciousness?
So the hard problem of consciousness is kind of, it stems from this idea that Nagel put forward in not knowing what it feels like to be a bat. It's that we can't reduce consciousness to a part of the brain. So we can't kind of say, right, consciousness comes from this part of the brain, or this particular part of the brain, or this part of the brain in particular. We think it comes from the brain. It seems to come from the brain. Experimentally, it seems to come from the brain, but we don't know how it comes from the brain.
There's 4 regions of the brain that are related to consciousness, but they don't know how those regions interact with each other to produce the conscious experience of human beings. So it's very interesting, though. It's super fascinating.
It is, and it's this kind of the hard problem itself is because we haven't got this reductionism, we haven't got an experiment, we haven't got the knowledge to say that this particular part of the brain causes consciousness in this way. I don't think that's a problem. And the way I relate it to people is by saying, look, if we stop thinking of consciousness as something that has to be reduced to the brain, we think that consciousness produces it, but just because we can't say, right, the frontal lobe is what's, the particular cause of it, that doesn't mean that it's a problem. And I don't think it is. And if we look at it less of this reducible thing and look at it more as a natural byproduct of the brain working, and I always use the analogy of a car, and that's I think of consciousness as locomotion.
Right.
Instead of thinking of consciousness of something that has to come from a particular part of the brain, or there's a hard problem, there's a problem there, we can't explain it. Think of it more of locomotion. When you've got a vehicle, let's say a car, that's in fully working order, as a natural byproduct of it doing what it's supposed to do, then locomotion comes about as a product of that. It is the natural product of all those bits working in harmony together.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter that you can't reduce locomotion. See, this, if you're going to compare it to the hard problem of consciousness, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, well, there's a hard problem of consciousness because if we take locomotion, we can't reduce it to a single wheel or a hubcap or a carburetor or a wing mirror or something like that.
Right.
But we don't need to, because if we look at it using that analogy, when the car's in working order, it doesn't matter that it can't be reduced to these things because it's just a byproduct of it doing what it's supposed to do. And this also accounts for problems we find in consciousness when consciousness is impaired in people. Because like when something goes wrong with the normal operation of a car, maybe a wheel falls off, or it runs out of gas or something, anything along those lines, that locomotion is impaired. And it's the same with the brain. When the brain's not working as it should do, with all those parts working in harmony, consciousness is impaired. And we can see that through experiments that have been done. We can see that through neurological studies that have been done. And to me, it's maybe I'm just kind of arrogant and I'm thinking out of the box and I'm completely wrong about it. But to me, it makes so much sense to look at consciousness that way, rather than saying there is a problem because we cannot reduce it down to this particular thing in the brain which is causing it.
Well, and I think also too that leads to people thinking like consciousness is external. Where they say it like consciousness is a realm unto itself, kind of like time or space, and it's like, well, no, because if it was something external, then everybody would be experiencing it the same way, regardless of, like, if you have, like, let's say you have like a brain disorder, or like as someone that has ADHD, I experience consciousness differently than someone that isn't neurodivergent. So if it was an external, this is what me philosophizing, like if it was like, something that was, a set state, then you wouldn't have different degrees of experience, and everybody would experiencing on the same playing field. Where, like, since it's not something that husband brought me more wine, love the husband, thank you, baby. So
clever husband, clever
I
husband.
asked him, I was like, please bring me more wine, and he was a wonderful husband. So Todd brought me more wine, but because he knows how to take care of his wife. So he's also working on my song for my channel, so that'll hopefully soon I'll get that downloaded and have as my intro rather than the 30-second timer. So anyway, look forward to that, guys. Anyway, like, but if it's, I don't think it is a set state. It has to come from some part of any being that it that has kind of like, some kind of processing center, like but I think that's hard for people to conceptualize because we only have our own experiences of consciousness. So it's hard to get like, well, what's the bat's, experience of consciousness? It's like, well, I don't know, but I would like to learn, and I think that it's just hard because I think that for people, they want to extend sort of like a metaphysical woo thing to consciousness rather than just a process of the brain, and it's just like, no, it's a process. We just don't understand why these 4 regions, and there's probably other parts of the brain too that has to be studied, that somehow bring about a conscious experience. And then the chemicals in the brain, the hormones, how those affect things. Like, I'm going through perimenopause right now. My consciousness is going through a thing, because my hormones are all whacked.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons we need to include animal studies into it as well, because the different physical makeup of animals and those animals that we do understand, or the parts that we do understand of how they experience consciousness,
Thank you, AJ.
it's
Appreciate that.
it seems the most kind of encompassing idea that we have, that consciousness comes from the brain. And when brains are different in
Mhm.
different species, they appear to experience consciousness in a different way. And it's when we look at ourselves as a species. It's not my microphone. Oh, got off. It's doing
No,
that
it's
thing now.
no,
Just
you
upset. When we when we look at
nope.
ourselves as a species, and kind of like the way we interpret reality, we can see, we can spot those kind of uh, impairments in consciousness. Now, whether that was something as simple as me without my glasses on, not being interpreted, cross-reference that with other things, and then this kind of extends down to brain injuries, hormones, all these other things.
Yeah,
We can
there's so much.
cross-reference it.
It's a complicated system, but also like I'm sorry, like, but other species also are affected by damage or fluctuation in their chemical experience as well. So there's that. Like,
Yeah,
I'm just thinking of
absolutely.
those ants that get the spores in them, and then they they go from the group, and then they climb, and then like the spores from the mushroom that start like growing out of them, like they
Yeah,
experience something wrong with the neurotransmitters to the ant's brain, that affects them, where that spore of the mushroom, those spores affect the way that fungus is going to affect the way that it grows. That's interesting.
yeah.
you know that's where my
Even the
mind
way
went.
we excuse me, the way we assess information via consciousness is interesting, because a lot
Yeah.
of people think that when we are looking at the world, uh, and we're looking at, and I'll go into the kind of ghosts bit of the book, when we're looking at the world and
Spooky.
we're interpreting the world around us, they think we are, when we see things like a video camera, and that's not how we operate at all.
Ghost.
We
Oh,
have
ghosty. Cara gave me this ghost for my birthday.
that's I think that should feature in the book as well. The
Hello, ghosty. It's very
Helen's
cute.
ghost
It
should
says, "I
use.
hope we're friends." Like they said this to me. It says, "I hope we're friends until we die." Then I hope we stay friends so we can scare the shit out of people together. So, like that little ghosty. About
Yeah,
ghosts.
I think yeah, the way we interpret things is, it's not like a video camera. It's made up of separate kind of still images, and the brain picks up the rest. Most of
Yeah.
what we experience is made from memory. The vast majority of what and this has been shown experimentally in people, as
Yep.
well, in psychological experiments and neurological experiments. The way we kind of interpret stuff is mostly from memory, and this is why people who want to trick you into thinking there are ghosts in places will take you into a dark room in an unknown location. You're not going to. We're not going to kind of have uh, this person. You don't go on a ghost walk in a city like York or one of Edinburgh or one of these other places that do ghost walks at 12 o'clock noon in the middle of the day. You go in, unless you go in some kind of underground vault. You will do it when it gets dark, because that's when the atmosphere comes alive, and and you can kind of do this. But if you are in your house, in your normal house, and you're familiar with your surroundings,
Mm-hmm.
and the light is on, and everything is kind of just normal, you are less likely to see something you can't explain than if you're in a dark room in somewhere you've never been before, because all you've got in that dark room where you've never been before is a very, very small amount of information coming in.
Right.
And that small amount of information is cross-referenced with what you know about the world already, the picture you've already built up in memory, in your conscious experience. And this small amount of information that comes in, you then start to fill the gaps. And that's why you're more likely to see a ghost in or something unnatural or supernatural in one of these locations that you're not used to, because your brain is literally playing tricks on you, because everyone, human brains are shit. That's the way their natural way,
Don't tell people that.
the natural way they operate is not very good in that scenario. It's very good in others, very good in an evolutionary sense, but it's not very good for processing information like that. If you're actually prone to believing in ghosts, then you go into one of these environments, you're almost guaranteed to see something that you consider to be supernatural, because you're already predisposed to thinking that something is going to be there that's supernatural. So when your brain is making uh, ideas up like that, that's when it
Richard,
kind of
hold on one
does
second.
this stuff.
1 second. I have to pee. This is the way that it is on my show. Keep talking. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
I'm going to kind of address, while you do that, Kian Aris, who's put, this guy's putting down human potential. No, I am not. I'm not doing that at all. And leaving out the possibility of a mystical experience. I don't know what that means. What do you mean by mystical experience? Because when papers have been written on mystical experiences, very loose terminology has been used to describe mystical experiences. There was one paper which talked about psilocybin studies, and it used a quote by Alan Watts, who is hardly a great person to have as a scientific kind of example of a psychological and mystic experience. So to say that, leaving out the possibility of mystical experience, I would need to know what you mean by mystical experience, because I fully accept that human beings can have experiences that they consider mystical and outside of themselves. That's a completely different thing to say to saying that is a supernatural thing.
Well, and
Yeah,
and
I
I'll,
mean, it wasn't very good, though. He wasn't a very good philosopher. That's the problem. He really wasn't. I'm not going to sit here addressing the chat all night,
so
but I just wanted to address that while Helen was absent. But sorry, Helen, go on.
and also too, cosmic consciousness is not really a thing. It is it was kind of invented because we have this sort of like pattern recognition, and because of pattern recognition and archetypes and things like that, like we think that, and also because we're a very emotional species, we will start making inferences like, if especially if our consciousness are affected by, fluctuations within our brain, and that if we have a very strongly emotional experience with whether it's joy or fear, and there's some kind of something that we can't explain, because when our emotional brains are activated, our logic gets turned off and we'll interpret those things as otherworldly or magical. um that's just because your brain is doing brain stuff. and and also too, it's very hard to replicate in a lab, because usually because our brain states are constantly changing, and usually those things happen in highly emotional states that we're not able to replicate that, like like having those experiences in a repeatable pattern, because they tend to be personal, and people will associate that them having a mystical otherworldly experience, when really it's just that you're in a highly emotional state. You're having an experience or feeling of, euphoria or intense fear, and will interpret that as something that is actually helping outside of yourself, when really it's the way your brain's interpreting it.
Yeah, I want to address a paper called Classic Hallucinogens and Mystical Experience, Phenomenology and Neural Correlates from 2018 by Frederick Bartlett and Roland Griffiths. This was done there from the Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences and Department of Neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And in this paper, and this is an Alan Watts quote I was referring to, in this paper, it describes mystical experience. This is the mystical experience which sets the tone for the rest of the paper, to say that people have mystical experiences. And this is the description used for that purpose in the paper. Mystical experiences are those peculiar states of consciousness in which the individual discovers himself to be one continuous process with God. Now, that is poisoning the well before we start. That is saying that, there is a God in which we are a physical process continuing from. That is not investigating fairly and responsibly the idea of mystical experiences. And yes, mystical experiences, I agree, have been studied extensively in the lab. And it's only in studies where the consciousness is affected by things like drugs or being stimulated in some other way, where these mystical experiences are seen as supernatural. And the controls in these experiments are terrible. They really, really are. And they're conducted by people. They're not repeatable, by the way.
That's what I meant. Like it can't be like like trying to show evolution as a pattern. It's not working on the same framework.
Yeah, it's frustrating that these kind of things are put forward. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately, due to the way science is and studies things, lots of things that are wrong are studied. They really, really are. It is defined. I'm not going to keep Kian. If you want to discuss this, call Talk Heathen when I'm on, and we'll discuss it. So I'm not going to use all this time to talk about this. They are talked about. They are discussed by 6 characteristics. Yes, which Walter Stace put forward. I am not a newbie in this area of study. Those 6 characteristics which define a mystical experience are sacredness, a sense that what is encountered is holy or sacred, a noetic quality. The experience is imbued with an aspect of meaning and a sense of encountering ultimate reality that is more real than usual everyday reality. Weird that when you've took a shitload of drugs. Deeply felt positive mood, joy, ecstasy, blessedness, peace, tenderness, gentleness, tranquility, and awe. Number 4 is ineffability. The experience is difficult to put into words. Paradoxicality. To explain the experience, one seems to have described the coexistence of mutual exclusive states or concepts. And the 6th aspect is transcendence of time and space. An introvertive mystical experience may have a non-spatial and non-temporal aspect, such as that traditional notion of time and space have no meaning. In the conclusion of this particular paper, it says, certainly not all experiences with classic hallucinogens are of the mystical type. This is the important part. However, with the proper setting, preparation, support, and dose of a classic hallucinogen, mystical experiences are occasioned at high probability. So when you've got somebody telling you what you're going to experience, poisoning the well, and setting you up for experiencing this stuff. You are going to experience it. And the wording is very, very important because it states altered sense of time and space that accompany introverted mystical experiences. It doesn't say that time and space itself has been altered. It says there is a sense of altered time and space. I've experienced all this during meditation. I have experienced those 6 qualities of mystical experience. I do not consider those experiences supernatural. So I agree that people have these experiences. I agree with that wholeheartedly. My contention is that they are not supernatural in nature. Kian then goes on to say that I'm poisoning the well, and I says that these double-blind studies are unreliable. No, I'm not. I'm not at all. Give us, like I say, give us a call on Talk Heathen, and we will have a discussion about it further. Please do call, unlike the caller who has been who's been calling every other show on talk shows for the past 4 years, who I've been repeatedly inviting for 4 years to call me on the show, who has never had the fucking bollocks to do it. So please
Weird
do
they
so.
do that.
Please give me that call and let's have that conversation and let's literally rip this apart. Anyway.
Kian, I already warned you. If I have to warn you again, I'm kicking you out. I'm giving you a verbal warning now. I give you written, now verbal, and I'm gonna turn on my boss mode if you keep talking about this and kicking you out. We're done. And I'm gonna ask my friends in the chat, don't encourage him.
Anyway.
So let's talk about but this gets us, this is kind of like, how are we interpreting like what is actually going on? What is the real world that we are actually experiencing? And I think for like you and I are going to have a different experience of how we're perceiving reality, that, reality is perception. Which I think Albert Einstein said, like, what do you say about perception? Like reality is in, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, it's a very stubborn sort of way of perceiving reality. Like it is just all how we're like, there's a constant reality, but the way we're perceiving it is very different. And because we experience these things this way, we tend to bring our own bias and understanding into that perception versus like what is actually objective. And I think that causes a conflict, because when people want to interpret reality the way that they want to see it versus what it is, gets people to feel defensive. We were talking about this earlier about people feeling insulted, feeling sensitive towards like, pushing their worldview. If you're having that problem, it's hard, because I get it too. Like we all feel this, we're all biased in our own ways, and and we're emotionally activated, like all of that like, yeah, I'm a very logical being. It gets shut off, and then we're going to double down on our own perspectives, regardless if you have a realistic atheistic sort of skeptical framework, versus if you have a religious like woo sort of perspective, and I think that we have to be careful when we're trying to look at things in like that objective sort of like, what is the real world, what is that objectively going on, versus like what I would like for it to be true.
Yeah, that's what's great about scientific empiricism, is it gives us the tools, and we've developed tools beyond ourselves as kind of extensions of ourselves, by which we can measure that in an objective way. And when we are making mistakes, we can kind of pick up on that. These methodologies show that. And it's really, really kind of interesting to go down these routes. It's it's amazing how there was a show, it was a podcast on the supernatural, about the supernatural, and I can't remember the name of the thing. It was a British podcast, and they did a few episodes of it on, they converted into a TV show for the BBC. And there was they did an experiment on there where they got, I think it was a little toy that just squeaked, just like made a little squeaky noise, so something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And when they made this noise, they held a piece of paper up with the word on, and every single person heard that word come from the squeaky toy, even though it wasn't saying that word, it was just making a noise. But just the suggestion that it was saying that word led every single person in that room, and you as the viewer, to hear that word. And that is how strong this kind of the way our brains can be manipulated it is. And that's why it's not just a case of, and this is why I would try and push this forward in the book, that it's not just a case of people who believe in God, or people who believe in the supernatural, or people who believe in universal consciousness. It's not just people like that who are caught out by stuff like this, even though that they are. It's not just people like that who are caught out. It's all of us, all of the
Mm-hmm.
time, all of the time. And you can do it, and I do this myself. I try and catch myself when my brain makes mistakes, because I'm a sad
Mm-hmm.
geek and I like experimenting on myself first and foremost. And there's so many times during everyday life where I spot my brain making these mistakes. Where I see
Oh, me
things
too.
that aren't there. I hear auditory hallucinations, and when you start looking for it, you realize how often it actually happens to you, and it's just the normal operating function of the brain, and that's what leads us into these erroneous beliefs. The fact that we're not aware of this stuff happening. I had the ghost encounter. I've had a couple. I used to be
Oh, we
the
can talk about our
resident.
ghost encounters. I got one. We can talk about it. Go ahead.
I used to be the resident skeptic on a ghost hunting team. So I've had a few of out of the ordinary encounters, but this
I
one
have a
didn't.
podcast for you that I love. One's a believer, one's a skeptic, and
That
it's
might be the one I
hysterical.
was talking about. Was it a British one?
No, it's American.
Oh, okay. It's not the one I was talking about then.
But it is the best show. They go to like side note, I can't remember the name of the podcast right now, but my oldest got me into it. It is hysterically funny, but also too, the one's a believer and one's a skeptic, and they're best friends, which it creates this really awesome dynamic. But they go to like, insane asylums and like haunted places and like, folklore myths and and it's great because like you see the contrast between them of someone that it like think this is all bullshit, and it's kind of like playing up the comedy with versus the person that actually believes, and how they're investigating the exact same place, but they're having two different experiences with it, and it's great. It's very funny though, also as well. I can't remember the name of it, but it's very good. But it's one of those things. So tell me about your experiences encountering ghosts as a skeptic.
Yeah, the the kind of one that I like to refer to is this one that I was in bed, and I literally saw in front of me at the foot of my bed materialize two girls in Victorian dress. I was just waking up, which is where most ghost encounters of full body apparitions occur. I was just waking up, and I saw two fully clothed Victorian clad girls in bodily appear in front of me. Because I'm kind of well practiced at this, I I recognized it for the interplay between my waking brain and the light coming through the curtains and the way the angle the light was shining. But for that split second, I was kind of stopped in my tracks before I kind of figured out what was going off. Had I not been well practiced in that aspect of things, had I been prone to believing, had I been a believer, then I would have sworn to this day that I actually saw two girls appear in front of me. And
Right?
it's just simply things like that that can make the difference between somebody who is authentically believes that they've seen apparitions appear and them recognizing it for what it actually is, for the illusion that it is, for the mistakes that our brains are making, as it actually is. And it's very hard to have a conversation with someone who authentically believes that they've witnessed something like that, and to try and kind of say to them, look, let's use this structure. Look at the way the brain works. Look at the way we interpret the world. Look at the mistakes that our brain makes all the time. And let's apply that to what you've seen. Now, what is the more probable scenario? What is what is more likely the outcome here? It's very, very hard to persuade people who are set in believing things like that. And that is kind of that is what I want to set out to do with this book. It's to lay out this framework to say, look, this is the way the brain works. And this is what is likely happening when those things are occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why I've set the chapters out the way I have, whereas I talk about the psychology of it, I talk about the neurology of it at the beginning. And then the rest of the book, we can refer back to that and say, see, this seems convincing. But if we look at this, how the brain works, then we can recognize it for what it is. It's a really, really good book by Dr. Richard Wiseman, who's a psychologist, called Paranormality, which does this. And the great thing about this book is it has little 2D. I've talked about this book before, but it has two little 2D barcodes in it. And what you can do is when he talks about these, at the start of the chapters, he kind of gives you these little experiments to do to see if you can trick yourself into experiencing this stuff. And it gives in the book, it gives you little 2D barcodes, and you can scan these barcodes and it takes you to his YouTube channel. And one of the things it's got in there, it's got the gorilla in the gorilla suit experiment, the famous psychological experiment that was done.
Yeah,
where
we did that as a thing for an RFR talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about how our brains don't process information the way that you think we do. You know?
Yeah, it's great that this book is great because he actually takes you to the videos and shows you the videos and explains what's going off. And his book is all about, I mean, his book is strictly about kind of the kind of ghost stuff and things like that. Whereas mine is more towards kind of epistemology in general and applying it to different areas. But yeah, it's great. I love stuff like that. Another thing that is great about the book that really is fascinating for me is I'm a bit of an old hippie. And I like to kind of, as Hawkwind once sang, space is deep. And
so deep.
and
like
I have this thing where I'm so kind of impressed by thinking about the numbers, the size,
it's
and stuff like this. And one thing I want
I have a hard time conceptualizing like beyond the observable universe. I'm like, wait, hold on. Like this not might be the complete universe. Okay, cool, great, and it's expanding. like, and then your brain is trying to conceptualize that, and because we only have like this stupid 3D model, it's kind of like the math. I've had people like Brian Cox like try to explain this to me, and I go, I get it, but I don't. like like please explain to me like I'm 5 years old, but also at the same time, like it is deep, and it kind of and also it feels very kind of spiritual. This sort of conceptualization that, the universe is far bigger and far wondrous, than my little stupid 3D brain can put together. But the math spans out, thank you, cosmologists. But it's still at the same time, like I can see why people conceptualize it as something spiritual or otherworldly, because like I feel it's a wondrous thing, but I'm like, because my brain has a hard time processing that sort of information. you know
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating that feeling you get of kind of overwhelmness. I think
yeah.
one of the problems, and it's something that I try and address in the book. One of the problems we have is that we've kind of been given this idea of the expansion of the universe in kind of graphic form. You
Right.
see the little point it starts from, and then the kind of sideways V shape expanding outwards with all the different epochs in it. And I think that belittles the scope of how big it actually is, and it's something that I think more people need to think about, just the sheer size of it. And there's so many like facts that don't seem to make sense as well, that are counterintuitive about it, like the fact that it's expanding but not expanding into anything, the fact that when the big bang happened, it happened everywhere. It
Right.
wasn't at this start point that we see on these diagrams, and then it expanded. The big bang actually happened everywhere. And it's like things like this which seem counterintuitive, which for me are the most fascinating things about the universe, and I love that.
like
And
like like the fact that two particles can be, you know light years apart, and they're the same particle and they rotate the same way, but and they seem separate, but they're the same particle. My brain like is spooky. One, spooky, and two, but like trying to conceptualize that, I'm like, they're two, but they're same. Like, which would go into like, the Trinity, like, like, it's like they're separate entities, but one. If you were gonna use like a spiritual experience to explain that, but it's like, but like the way when a scientist that explains it to me, like I'm 5, explains it, I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
It, but I think for, and also too, the problem with large numbers is a hard um thing for people to understand. I understand why people like have a hard time understanding evolution, because it's millions and millions and millions of years. It's not something that is, super easy, like, where dogs have only evolved over like a couple hundred years. That sort of conception of it being controlled, like the watchmaker argument with dogs, I think it's harder for people to conceptualize. You know, I get that, but also at the same time, even though like I get it, because it seems kind of impossible, but if you actually understand the science behind it, it actually makes a whole shitload of sense. But it's the problem with large numbers, the problem of our only immediate experience, the problem that our time is finite. You get maybe 100 years if you're lucky, around 80. Like, I've had a good run. It's fine. Like, it's hard to conceptualize that. It's very hard, and I get why people have a hard time wrapping their brain around it. You know?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I know it's real, and I still have a hard time wrapping my brain around it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the for me in my private musings, shall we say, it's one of the things that is one of the things. The size of reality is one of the things that I am so kind of fascinated with. I love that. I love thinking about that. It's that and the consciousness thing are the two kind of big kind of private musing things I have. I love thinking about those things in my free time because, as I have mentioned, I am an incredibly boring tit. Uh, but
Well, I mean, like I philosophize about self with myself in my car. So I talk to myself and I have conversations with myself about philosophical concepts that I'm trying to understand.
yeah,
Like I'm talking, like I'm having a conversation with another person, and I'm trying to work it out in my brain because I need the verbalization with my ADHD brain. Um, and I think also too, like, because I'm curious about the world. Like I'm curious about trying to understand these things in my weird layman, brain that doesn't understand like it was very weird. Like I'm not very good like with like algebraic equations. Like I suck at math, but statistics I got. Like because I was able to because it was applying to things in the real world the way that I understood it, like probability and the way that it worked. Algebra and things like that, nope. Calculus, no. Statistics, yes. Got that. And I think because it's applicable to things that I kind of understand in a way that of probabilities. And that's probability has more of a concrete thing rather than like algebra seems very abstract to me. you know, the way that I learn,
yeah, and I think that's a great way of kind of looking at it as well. This idea that we, things seem sometimes we need that abstract aspect of it to kind of try and understand it. And I think I think that for me is the difference between kind of having a cosmologist or a physicist explain something to you in something with a well understood model behind it that we might not fully grasp as laymen. The difference between that and someone like a theologian trying to explain a triomni god or a trinitarian god, which really doesn't make sense. It's not that
What, you
it's
mean you
just
can't be three persons at once and also
an
yourself give
abstract.
birth to
Well,
yourself? You
here's
can't do like you can't be the father and the son at the same time. What, Richard? What?
the thing is, that's it. I
Makes
mean,
perfect sense.
Christy on the show the other week mentioned something about my philosophy and stuff, and something along the lines of, well, Richard might be interested in talking about that shit, but the rest of us kind of aren't.
I listen.
So,
I love things that they're gonna cook your noodle,
we
and I'm like, how? Explain explain to me how this works. You get to explain in a way that I can understand. Explain to me like I'm 5. Go. like,
yeah,
like,
I love that. I think
I love
you
that
know
timer. By the way, I love that timer. Explain to me like I'm 5.
one
like,
one of the one of the things that I kind of come across most in regards to the kind of theistic aspect of this is the as I've just mentioned, the Trinity and the problem of triomni God. And it kind of theists kind of back themselves into a corner with this because they will, if they say that there is a triomni God that exists outside of time and space, then that God is impossible, can't exist. A triomni God cannot exist. if they try saying, well, actually, it's only maximally powerful because it's constrained by the laws of logic, they've then shot themselves in the foot, because if they're also claiming that they are a Trinitarian, then if the God is constrained by the laws of logic, then God cannot be fully man and fully God at the same time. So which is it? Which
Right.
route are you going down? Because, to get out of one problem, you've created this other problem for yourself.
Right. And that adds 10 more questions to that problem.
Yeah. It's and that kind of stuff is, for me, philosophy is interesting. For me, philosophy is about asking these questions. That's why I love philosophy, because it allows you to ask these questions. I think there is a danger with philosophy, and I think this is what Christy was alluding to on the show. I think there is a danger with philosophy where we can you can go one of two ways with it. If you're not just asking questions with it, you can go the way of being a stuffy, arrogant philosopher who thinks that they are right, and
Right.
that they have a point to make, and they are right, and they want to kind of put their opinion forward, and they want to make a mark for themselves in the world of philosophy. I've met quite a few of these
Cool.
people. And then you can
cool.
And then you can go the other way, and these people are people generally who understand the philosophy and who can explain it to laymen if they want to. They just have this kind of thing that a lot of cases they don't, because they want to have this air of superiority over people. And I'm painting with a broad brush here, and I'm doing so on purpose. And then you kind of have the other end of that, is where you have these kind of what I would call YouTube philosophers, but sometimes called philosophy bros, where they like
I
these
love me some
big
philosophy
terms.
bros. Do. I love me some philosophy bros.
They
I do.
they are rampant on TikTok. They are absolutely rampant on TikTok, and
this is why I don't go to TikTok.
I
don't go there once a week, because otherwise it's the bad place. No, there's a lot of wonderful things happening on TikTok, but like philosophy bros, not so much.
Yeah, there may be there may be the kind of, they may understand philosophy, many times they don't, but they like the words that they hear, and they want people to think that they that they understand it, and they like to tell as many people about it on social media as possible.
They're very big brain, Richard. They're so big brain.
Yeah, and so I think I think that for me is the kind of the two extremes of philosophy. I think when it's used as I don't want to say should be used, because I don't want to gatekeep it, but when it's kind of used in, I think, is the best way to use it. It's brilliant. It really, really is. And I think a lot of people miss that, because when they encounter it at these two extremes. And I think that's a shame. I really, really do think that's a shame. Excuse me.
No, it's fine. I'm just Kelly, want to be a mod? Kelly, it's done. You're a mod now. I know my friends. Anyway, back to that. Like on the because I'm not well versed in philosophy. Like I'm very well versed in psychology and logical fallacies, because there's a lot of philosophy in psychology. It is, because it is about how we think, and our perceptions versus our reality, and also how we're processing the information that we're coming in, which is affected by the way that our brains process that information. And that is shaped by experiences. We can have a debate versus nature versus nurture. That's a conversation we could have. But it is affected by philosophy is affected by perception, and a lot of perception comes from psychology. So like, you know, there's this dance between the two that happens a lot. But if you want to talk to me about like what a philosopher actually said, when people start talking about philosophy, I'm like, please go listen to J Mike, because Helen doesn't know a lot about like a lot of philosophical concepts and what people are actually talking about. I have a good layman's understanding of philosophy, but I don't study philosophy. I study psychology even though I have my degree. And I got a degree that I didn't want to make money on. That's what I did. And then I was like, I have a degree in psychology. Am I working with it? No. But I see so much of philosophy within I understand philosophy through a psychological frameworks, even though I don't understand like if you want, if someone's like, please explain like, you know, Kant's philosophy, I don't fucking know. like I don't understand like Kant and his philosophical framework. I know he's a racist, I know that. But other than that, I'm like, you know, I can't quote Kant. You know, I like Kierkegaard. I do understand the philosophy of Kierkegaard, because he was like a humanist believer. So I kind of dig Kierkegaard in that regard, as someone that was like, well, I believe, but I also believe that he also has this philosophy that reality is perception, but he also took it through like a spiritual framework, which I can kind of, even as an atheist, I can kind of get, if you were going to have a theistic sort of perspective on that philosophy. Like, I get it, you know. I'm more like, I get you, man. I see where I see where you're laying down. So but again,
Yeah,
I watch YouTube videos on philosophy. I don't read books. Like,
I think one of the best people in the ACA actually is I think me and J Mike are more on the practical. Let's have a discussion about philosophical concepts. I think probably the best person in the ACA that I've seen who can talk about philosophers and their particular beliefs is Dan. Objectively, Dan. He's really good at kind of grasping the central kind of core of what people want to discuss. What the philosophers themselves discussed. That for me is. It's not something I tend to retain. It's something that I've had to do. Having done philosophy at university, you have to do that. And it's something I had to do, studying Buddhism, looking at the Buddhist philosophies. It's not something I particularly enjoy doing, and it's not something I spend a lot of effort retaining what a particular philosophist has said about a particular thing, because if it's out of my area of interest, I will kind of just let it go by the wayside. I'll learn it for when I have to learn it, and then bye. Not interested in you anymore. You're boring me now. So unless it relates directly to kind of the stuff I'm interested in, I'm not overly interested in kind of retaining it. But philosophy it's great, it's fascinating. It's funny because I don't know whether it's the opening line in the book or one of the opening lines in the book. I actually just put something along the lines of philosophy is boring. Because I think that's the way it comes across.
like, did you watch The Good Place?
I have watched The Good Place, yeah.
Okay, like I'm always like cheaty in The Good Place. Like I love moral philosophy, but nobody else does. Like I want to talk about moral philosophy and like how we conceptualize these ideas about reality and how we treat one another. Like those are discussions I want to have, and nobody else wants to have them. So I like cheaty is my spirit animal.
Yeah, it's funny actually because my degree is actually in religious studies, philosophy, and ethics. That's the full shebang.
It's
And
so fascinating.
and the author of the writer of that show actually wrote a book about ethics as well,
Yeah,
an
he did.
introduction to
Michael Shear.
ethics.
He also did Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is also a great show.
I've not
Watch
seen
both
that, and
shows.
it's been one I've been
Brooklyn
wanting to catch
Nine-Nine is
up with.
so good. Like, it's so good. Which also goes into like authoritarianism within like a like cop structure. But there's a lot of same ideas about like how do we what conversations are we having about like authority and through a comedic lens, but it's like not deep like a puddle. So like it's a very good show. But like The Good Place is one. It's whenever it's like what I want to learn about moral philosophy, I'm like, don't bother reading books, just watch the show.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great show. I've not actually finished it. I think I'm about halfway through it. So
Yeah,
I,
I finished the show, and my oldest and my roommate have not watched the whole series, and I was like, I'm not going to spoil it for you because you're going to cry. It's very good. But it's so like it's weirdly spiritual, but in an atheistic way. That's the only way I can describe it. Like that's the only way I can. It is a spiritual experience, even if you're an atheist. That's how I feel about like Midnight Mass. It is a religious trauma show, but also very beautiful and like spiritual experience for someone that is a non-believer. So that there's that. Because I do think things can be wondrous and spiritual. Like I call it psychologically spiritual. It's not anything external, but you're having an experience, you're having a spiritual experience through a psychological process of your brain.
yeah,
There's that.
exactly, and
Yeah.
that's how I think. That's having had experiences. Talking about
Yeah.
what we were talking about earlier, when we had that kind of this idea of mystical experiences being described as using 6 dimensions. I've had every one of those dimensions of what
Yeah.
is called mystical experience in a meditative state, and I have no problem with them whatsoever on that kind of level. It's when you start to attribute these supernatural elements to things, and it happens in a lot of things. It happens with deists when deists start trying to equate, a supernatural element to the universe, and I don't think it's necessary. I think doing stuff like that is frustrating for me because it is very much God of the gaps kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And we've got this thing that we're trying to explain, we're trying to investigate it, and we can go about that in 2 ways. One way is to take it a step at a time, try and falsify it, try and do the best we can with it, and make these tests repeatable, make these tests fair, make these tests not leading. And the other way is say, well, I think God done it, and let's try and get that out of people. And I think that's such a wrong way round of doing things. I really, really do think that's a really bad way of going about things. And it all comes down to this idea that we need to kind of agree when we're having conversations with each other to start with, because it's all very well and good doing a worldview comparison, but when we start doing worldview comparisons, what we get is often stuck at the first hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we'll get is, because we all start from axioms. So we get, I start from this axiom, you start from this axiom. We can't agree on these axioms. So we come into conflict straight away. And
Right.
a lot of the conversation comes around this conflict. We can bypass all that by saying, here's what reality is. Do we agree on that? And in most cases, we will get an agreement on that. And then, right, now we've agreed on what reality is, let's look at those things that we don't agree on, which we believe. So
Right.
it might be a question of a ghost existing. It might be a question of a god, a particular god existing, some other supernatural thing. It might be something that's not supernatural. It might be something that's kind of a non-normative, like aliens
So
visiting Earth. Sorry, Helen.
no,
Go on.
keep going. But I want to tell you my ghost story. But keep
Yeah.
going.
So what we can do there is we can agree on the basic kind of fundamentals of what reality is. And then when we've got those things, when we have those disagreements, that things are outside of that shared reality, then we can concentrate on exploring those. And it cuts away all of this bickering that we have if we do a straight worldview comparison, where we're arguing about the very axioms we're beginning with. And I think that's a much better way of going down these conversational routes. When we have I had a great conversation. It's a guy who I've talked to a couple of times on TikTok, a theist, someone who's got a degree in philosophy, and we have the best conversations
I love
because,
talking to, like, those are the type of conversations I want to have. Like,
yeah,
because there's no arguing. There's just like, this is my perspective. This is your perspective. Like, let's go, you know, let's have a conversation. Like, because even if I don't agree, you're going to say something that's going to cook my noodle. Like that I have to that I'll sit there and go, that like let me think about this, because it helps expand my brain, you know, um, which is, and it helps me be more empathetic actually, because I'm all about like compassion and kindness. I don't really care what you believe; it's what you do with your beliefs. That's more my philosophy, you know.
I want
But
to
like,
hear your ghost story, Helen.
okay, so when we lived in our old house when my kids were small, this was really funny because my oldest brought this up. We were, I don't know, it's like a couple months ago. We were all stoned watching something, and it's like, do you remember the cowboy? Okay, so me and my husband had experienced this cowboy figure at the end of our bed when we lived in our old house. Okay, now my kids experienced this too, and from my memory, me and my husband did not mention the cowboy ghost to the kids. Okay, and Kai, like we talked about it off and on, as they were growing up, because they mentioned it after the fact. Then Kai goes, and Kai is also a skeptic and an atheist and doesn't believe in supernatural shit. He's like, and they go, do you remember the cowboy mom? And I go, yes. But the thing is though, is that as someone that doesn't believe in ghosts anymore, but we all had that experience, I was like, okay, I'm like, did I mention it where I thought they weren't listening? Did I mention it? Me and my husband both talked to each other. We had that experience, but though at the same time, like, did he wake up with the, feeling that you're being watched? And then one of us mentioned to each other, like, did you see a cowboy? And then you fill in the gaps, that kind of thing. And then so on and so forth. So when I started to deconstruct it, like we all had the experience of this cowboy standing at the end of the bed with a 6-shooter, or did the interpretation of the memory change over time? Because that's the thing about memory, is that our neurons in our brain actually see that we are having that memory for the first time. It doesn't like interpret it as a long memory, because we will fill in gaps and add in more details. This is why eyewitness testimony is shit in court, because that's the way it works. But it's just very funny, because like we all have the same memory, but as a skeptic, I'm like, how are we interpreting that, and what other influences around it influence of the way that we interpret it? And if you're not looking for those things, you'll tend to fall in bias and say like, oh, you all had experience of the same ghost. When really it was like, well, maybe. Or did we, through outside influence for things that we thought we weren't talking about, that we didn't realize, because our memories are shit. Like, tell me what you had for lunch last Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do it. The thing is, and this is the work of Dr. Julia Shaw is brilliant on memory research. And she's worked a lot with the British police in trying to get them to conduct interviews better. And she said she herself has had memories from childhood of holidays she's never even been on, yet she remembered going on these holidays.
I remember my brother teaching me to ride a 2-wheeler, and my family said, absolutely not, that was your father. And I was like, it wasn't Dickie? And they're like, no, it is your father. And I have clear memories that I swear my brother Dickie taught me to ride a 2-wheeler bike. Nope, it was my father.
Yeah, it's how the memory works. It's
human
brains are shit. It is how it works, and it's the thing is, when you're looking at an event, this is why I like watching balanced shows that explore the supernatural. not hype shows, but the kind of ones that genuinely balanced and try and seek explanations for it. Because you look at a lot of them, and sometimes I watched one the other week, and even the resident skeptic on it was like, "Yeah, that is strange," and it was pretty much the situation you were just describing there. And I was thinking to myself, that is not strange. You've got people who think they've witnessed a ghost, 2 adults who think they've witnessed a ghost. They're going to talk about that. It's not beyond the realms of the imagination that children have overheard that conversation. And if they think they've experienced, they will automatically then put that figure in that situation. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that's going. It's certainly not a big, wow, that's so unexplainable moment. And I think I think it's really important in kind of looking at memory. Memory research is so important in psychology. From kind of the earliest days of using it in the respect of looking at supernatural things, and also looking at it from the perspective of trying to, when you've got things like the Freedom Project, who've overturned so many wrongful convictions of people because the eyewitness testimony was flawed. And I think it's so important to kind of look at that research. It's very, very important. Elizabeth Loftus, Julia Shaw, go and look at those people. Go and look at the research those people have done. There are so many good memory researchers out there. And when you look at the work, you start thinking, even expert witnesses can be wrong. There was Elizabeth Loftus did a paper, and they actually looked at the result. I think it was Elizabeth Loftus who did it. They looked at the results of a train crash. I think it was in the US, and they had kind of a railway worker who worked on the lines all the time, and there were like a couple of other expert witnesses, and they all misremembered the events around the crash. And they were the
Right.
expert witnesses who were like looking at doing the inquiry. And they got these psychologists in, and these psychologists found that they'd actually
Cows is here. Hi, Cows. Cows has never showed up in
misremembered
my
all
stream
this
before.
stuff.
Sorry.
Cows our friend is
Sorry.
Cows our friend is great.
Like I usually see them on Discord where I'm not often on anymore, but like the fact that Cows is here. Sorry, I was just having a moment. Thank you so much for being here, sweet potato. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I got excited.
I love Cows a friend. Cows a friend, Cold Talk Heathen, and
yeah,
they did what many ardent "you are wrong, you atheists" people refuse to do, and when they refused to call the show, Cows our friend, even though they were nervous, actually took the step to call the show.
I watched that call, and it was a really, really good call. And that's why I really love Cows, because they're like, hey, I actually want to have a fucking discussion about this. Let's have a conversation. Where a lot of theists are like, they talk a lot of shit and they don't call in, and it's just like, yeah.
Imagine how good the shows would be if all our callers who believed in the supernatural were like Cows a friend and phoned up and said, you know what, I just want to have an honest conversation with you about this. It would be fantastic.
But also, Cows Are Friends is also a humanist and cares about other human beings, which is more important than about philosophy. So, also, awesome human being. I love you. You're an amazing human being. That's all I care about. Like, I want, like, this is thing. Like, we can debate about philosophy. That's great. And I think we should. But also, do you care about other human beings and you're trying to be a good humanist? You get a good person hat.
There's nothing finer than a good person hat. I have completely forgotten what we were discussing.
I will get there. I will get you a good person hat. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to design one. Like, send it to my friends. Like, but
what were we talking about?
I don't know, but I included the link. It's called, so the podcast I was talking about is called Watcher, and right. I put a link in the doobly-doo. Please watch it. It is so funny. Like, but also too, like, getting these two perspectives, and also you can tell the two hosts really like each other and care about each other, so that adds to the dynamic. Like, it's not mocking it, and which I think that's why I like it, because neither one is making, they do it in like making fun of your friend in a very loving way. Like, which I appreciate more than like mocking or like being awful, like, like, oh, you believe in ghosts, so you're like a dum-dum. It's like, no, it's like one's a skeptic, one's a believer, but they do these shows and it's done for community effect. But also, if you just look beyond that, because like the thing about satire and comedy, there's a little bit of truth there. And that's what I appreciate about it. So that's why, because also, like, they went to like an asylum, like you mentioned, like, you don't go to like a place that's supposed to be haunted, like in broad daylight, when everything's lit up and there's other people around. Like, every little noise and every little thing's going to, because of our natural instinct to avoid danger, because evolutionary wise, like, every little, even if you're in your house alone at night and there's a sound that you don't recognize, you're going to go, what the fuck was that? Yeah. Instead of you going, it's just noise, if you are inclined to believe in ghosts, and especially like an insane asylum or a particular, like the history is like this place is haunted or it's had a lot of violence or like, things very, very bad things happened here. There's this idea and this is something that I used to believe, that energy would, that negative energy would remain in that space and it would manifest into like a consciousness of like a ghost, it was like a recorder on a tape that was constantly playing back. If you think about it for 2 seconds, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you tend to believe in ghosts, like, because we tend to, actually, no, let me rephrase that. If you look at this through a trauma perspective, when you go through trauma, as someone that's been through trauma, that it does play like a recorder in your brain. It's not happening to you anymore, but the memory's still there and it tends to play over and over again. Instead of applying it to the brain, they apply it to the space. That's not how that works, but they'll use that as emotional association, using that pattern seeking to, say like, well, these terrible things happen here. So obviously, it's going to manifest in some way, the same way that it does in our brains. They make it external. When really it's like, no, it's just like you're told a spooky story.
Yeah.
And because you were told a spooky story and your anxiety is up and your pattern recognition and your logic is being shut down, that you're going to start looking for the things that prove that there's ghosts.
That tape recorder theory is it's first of all, it began on a completely fictional TV show in the 70s on
Was
British
that on
TV.
like Ghost Hunters or something?
No, it was way before in the 70s. It was just a story. It was just a ghost story
Okay.
It was like a made up fantasy fiction program. And they came up with this idea on it that this ghost that had been witnessed was a kind of a re-recording of something that had happened in the past. That's where that started. That kind of idea. And
I
it's
didn't
kind
know
of
that because that
yeah.
was like a thing in woo-woo circles.
And it's
So
taken off. It's taken off since then. But it's interesting as well because it's kind of put forward as this more scientifically plausible explanation for ghosts than it being the soul of someone who's died or the spirit of someone who's died. It's put forward in a lot of cases as this is a more plausible idea. But there's still nothing, literally nothing scientifically which backs this idea up.
This is the thing, like what we say is that your emotions are valid, but it's what you do with your emotions, because emotions are the process of the brain. So why would it be fucking external? Explain.
Yeah.
Because like this is my joke too, that like, when people say that ghosts have unfinished business, I'm like, what if your unfinished business is like you didn't get your laundry done? like what unfinished business are you talking about? Like, what if you didn't get laundry done? You were very emotionally attached to your laundry. Like, what does that mean? Like,
I was halfway through
what?
his shit when I died.
No, it's
I've
really
got
funny.
unfinished business.
As I say, like, now that I don't believe in ghosts anymore, guess what? I'm having 0 ghost encounters. Weird.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they are, to me, it's very interesting. I might talk to Dr. Richard Firth-Codby here actually about this, about what kind of work, because I don't know what kind of work has done, if any, has been done regarding strong emotional connections or strong traumatic experiences and viewing ghosts. I mean outside of losing a loved one. Outside of losing a loved one, and I mean kind of general traumatic experiences. That'd be really, really interesting to me.
There's studies on this. So like I was talking to my friend who works in they work with trauma survivors. And so like if we're talking about like spirit guides, kind of thing, it is the anthropomorphizing of an experience that you're having that you have to externalize to express.
Right.
So if you go through like a certain trauma, or you perceive a place that is relatable to a trauma that you experience, you will tend to amorphize that into a being or spirit that can use it as a concept to explain what's going on, the internal feeling of that trauma or experience. It's not so much like DID where you're like doing different personality kind of thing. It is that I'm anthropomorphizing this experience into something that I can. It's kind of a trauma coping mechanism.
Yeah.
That people use. But the thing is, though, is that like if you don't recognize it as a psychological phenomenon, you will contribute it to like an external thing, when really this is like your brain manifesting things that are helping you externalize on a subconscious level of something that you are associating with a certain trauma. This is being psychologically studied. It's a thing that is manifests itself in different ways. So like you'll see a lot of people like they'll say they have like like a Native American ancestor. Like I hear this a lot in woo-woo circles, because guess what? Who went through a lot, like perceived like Native American people, which is also kind of racist as like spiritual, like, like, connected with the spiritual realm, blah, 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 blah. And also as well wants to like associate their victimhood to, those who are, this, I'm not saying that this is conscious. There's a difference, but there's that association. They'll say like, I have a Native American spirit guide that is helping me process this problem that I'm experiencing of victimhood. And they'll say like, I have a Native American spirit guide, blah, 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 blah. Like I have a great grandma, or like some sort of like, and then it's usually associated with an animal. They like, and because I did this. I know what it is because I did this. And when you recognize it, you're like, fuck. And then when you talk to actually people that study this, like professionally, they're like, this is very common for people to externalize their trauma as a way of dealing with it. Because when it's inside you, is too close. But if I can externalize it, then I can explain it. So, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
You will have to send me some papers on that so I can have a look at that.
I will. I'll send you some shit. I'll bug Vincent, my best friend, about it, because he's experiences working with trauma survivors, which I will. He has the stuff. If you go to Google Scholar too, I think there's also if you go on Google Scholar and just put in anthropomorphizing trauma, you will get articles on this. It's not full DID where you're like disassociating. It's more of a coping mechanism of externalizing your trauma. But the thing is, though, instead of associating this is a psychological concept that you're doing, people will associate it with spirituality. And then if you're really into spirituality, you will expand this more into different aspects of the self. And I wonder also too, this is not something that I know that's studied or not. I wonder, because we have a very difficult time as human beings processing trauma, that also too, like religion is very traumatic, that if we move into these like woo sort of spiritual spaces, that this allows more this is why I say like woo stuff can be very fucking harmful, is that this acceptance of you have spirit guides and they're helping you, navigate the world, that people don't get a sense of self because it's always externalized. It's never like you. And this is an aspect of your brain, like a process of the brain that's trying to work through it versus like I'm going to externalize it and make it part of the process. Like this is why like I'm against woo-woo stuff because because it can be it's sneaky and insidious, and that's the thing that kind of bothers me about it.
Yeah. The harm it causes, even when someone's not doing it intentionally. I remember once
Yeah,
visiting a spiritualist church, and I was astounded by the amount of manipulation that went off there. Uh, the spiritualist movement itself is an odd phenomena, where
it's so weird.
where kind of a lot of the aspects that kind of came out to kind of prove it, things like table tipping and things, were disproved like in 1855. They were literally shown to be fraudulent. And the two sisters, the Fox sisters, who started the
Oh my
spiritualist
god,
movement.
like I mentioned them, they were proven, they admitted that
Yeah.
they were fucking with people, and people still think they're real. Like I had a whole conversation when I worked at the psychoeducation center. You watched my lecture. like about like how people were like, no, this is legitimate. I'm like, they admitted that they were doing some bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, but also too, it's kind of like, it's kind of like Fox Mulder. Like, I want to believe.
Yeah.
It's not that it's real. I want to believe it's real. And also,
Yeah.
too, a lot of the spiritualism movement came out of World War One, where there was a lot of mass death, and there was a lot of this sort of existential crisis of why are people dying for causes, that are outside the self, that is you're giving your duty to government. And and I think for modern times, they were dealing with that existential crisis as like, well, what does it mean to be like a person? What does it mean to give up your life for a cause outside of yourself? Those are questions I like. For the war and warfare had changed in the First World War,
Yeah.
where it became impersonal. And this is something that Tolkien writes about the interpersonal relationship with war. Now we're like seeing it now with drones, that you're not having to face another person as a human being that you're about to kill. And when you're dealing with that and dealing with that trauma, people moved to the spiritualism movement, and they wanted to know like their loved ones were okay, not and this is like a subconscious thing, not because they had fought for their country or whatever. Like, it is against the human instinct to kill each other. And so like, are you okay? Because we were taught that you will go to hell if you kill another human being, but I want to know you're okay. And if I can have some confirmation of that, and so dealing with the anxiety of death and the traumatization of losing loved ones, that I'm going to do this thing where please tell me my loved one is okay and they're not burning, so I can feel okay with the choices that they made. It's very psychological. This isn't, and this is something that we didn't see before the 1920s with the spiritualism movement. We didn't really see this before.
Yeah, you've just touched on. I don't want to keep bringing this back round to philosophy, but you've just touched upon the kind of one of the things with the trolley problem,
I love
where
the trolley problem.
where it's and not so much with the original trolley problem, but with kind of there's been so many reformulations of that uh, over the years to take into account different things, and it's funny how they, we have discovered through not always ethical psychological testing that we are, if we distance ourselves from
Mm-hmm.
the kind of crime, if you like, then we are more likely to kind of do things which are not humane in any way. And I think that's a very important lesson, uh, ethical lesson to take on. But regardless of what the kind of philosophical conundrum being thrown out there is, I think it's a very important, as a human being, we have a responsibility to look at ourselves, not so much make the judgment on other people, but certainly with our own behavior, to look at ourselves and take into account how, if our distancing ourselves from certain questions might
Right.
be having an effect on how we respond to those questions. And I think this also plays into. I'm saying this with your conversation with Cynthia fresh in my mind. Your
I,
our
I I love my Cynthia. She's my girl. I love her.
our interplay with kind of othering people also
Hmm.
plays into this.
Yeah.
It's all very, very fascinating. I mean, I'm not. Uh, Cynthia does some great social activism. She's a fucking fantastic human being, and she does.
She's a powerhouse.
She
like
certainly is.
I'm
Um,
like I want to be Cynthia when I grow up. like
I, 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 I don't do that. I come from a different kind of way of looking at these things, from a more, uh, I'm not out on the streets demonstrating. I'm thinking about, this stuff from a more philosophical point of view. But I
but
think it's,
everything has its place, like that's the thing, like whatever activism you're doing has its place in this broader, like if you're trying to get someone to be like, why do I have the perspectives that I have, which is something that I want to do, as a queer person, as a feminist, like I'm trying to get you to be like, well, let's actually look at your epistemology and let's have a conversation about it. And when they're confronted with real people, like what we do on TikTok, they have a harder time squaring it because you're
yeah,
not an abstract anymore. You're a person that they have to interact with, and I felt people when we've had these conversations stutter, and because they're confronted with an idea that goes against their moral framework.
yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that is one of the biggest issues we have with people. And I mentioned earlier on, I think in this show, where one of the biggest challenges for us is to convert those keyboard warriors, if you like, to coin a phrase, into people to come on the shows and have the conversations with us. And I mentioned, when we're having the discussion with the guy in chat earlier, and there is someone who I've been trying to get the show to call the shows for near enough four
Mhm.
years, and they have declined to talk to me on every single occasion, and that is frustrating. That is really, really frustrating. And I think it is because people are, if they think they're going to be challenged, then they don't want to take that step. I come from the opposite end of the spectrum. I
I
want to
want to
be
be
challenged.
challenged. I
Yeah,
want to be challenged. I'm like, please bring me something that I can cook my noodle about. Because if there's something I'm wrong about, I need to adapt and change to it. And that's why that's why we do the TikToks, because I can talk to people as long as I want. And also too, like when you have to deal with someone as a person rather than words, on screen, it still changed the dynamic, especially if the person is empathizing with you. That fucks with them. Because they're like, oh, you're not just an ideology, you're a person that actually empathizes with my, like the guy I talked to the other day who I got really mad at. And I'll tell you when people piss me off. Because I'll be like, I'm sorry, I got mad. but when I'm talking to somebody and I can see, like, I will always go, I'm sorry that happened to you. Or I'm like, I know you're a good person or whatever. Like, I know that you're doing your best, but I'm challenging like some, it's usually never religious. It's how through religion they're interpreting other people. Like that's the only, because it's not so much about being a deist. Like I don't care if you're a theist, I don't really care about that. It's how that is informing your relationships to other people. And if your relationship with your religion is telling you, I get to cast judgment onto other human beings and call that love, I am so sorry for you. I'm going to call that shit out. And I think that's more important. Like, okay, if you're claiming to be a moral person, let's have a conversation about harm. Let's have a conversation about like, not so much where your morality comes from as the manifestation of that morality. I think that's more of a more important conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just as a quick aside as well, I also know who our friend in the chat is. I've connected to the dots and I know who
Oh,
they
you
are.
did? You put them together?
Yeah, I've put the dots
Except
together.
for Yavish is here. Yay! I know the best people.
Yeah, we just to correct the people in the chat, because I am
I'll keep
fair.
talking. I have to go pee again. Keep
I
talking.
am a fair person. Okay, I'll take it, Ellen. I just to the people who were calling Kian out. Kian has in fact called all of the shows. In fact, Kian has called every single show that I know of in this space. Kian has talked to certainly all of the whole old guard of hosts and some of the new guard of hosts, and never, ever spoken to me on a call show despite my asking him to call for nigh on 4 years. Uh, and I'm not buying that we left you on hold so long because you called late in the show and you weren't on hold relatively long at all. So, yeah, I'm aware of who that person is in the chat now. So, let's just talk about briefly, because we were touching on this
I'm just
idea.
going to point out, I just want to point out that you can go ahead and call in early to the show and
Yes.
put in the queue. You don't even have to wait till the show is live. You can call in like 15 minutes early, and guess what? Our wonderful call screeners are already could put you in the queue. So, you don't even have to wait till the show goes live. So there you go. Just going to point that out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm feeling kind of snarky.
No, it's okay. I just hope this person takes the.
I don't like people that are like, oh, you don't want me to do this and like you do this. It's like, dude, I'm like, if you want to have a conversation, have a conversation. And if Richard's been like, come bring it, and you've been like, you're making excuses, it's just like, I bet if you saw him show up in the chat, you'd be like, I want him first. Like let's
literally,
have a.
the last time he called the show, and this is why I'm not buying this fact that he was on hold so long. The last time he showed up on the show, the first time he's ever called into a show I was hosting,
Yeah.
and it was a few weeks ago, and we were already on a call, and I saw him pop up, and I was taking that call next because I saw the call and I knew who it was. And they dropped before I'd even had a chance to take the call. I was literally about to press the take the call button, and they dropped.
Well, all you have to do is just like, even if you're dropped, like you can even say like, hey, like I happen to know because I've been in crew chat. like I know, like I've been with the ACA for 4 years. Like, so just if and Richard wants to talk to you, you'd be like, hey man, I want to talk to this person, and because also the host gets to choose who they talk to.
Yeah. It's
So
really, I mean,
weird.
we can go back and forth on excuses as to why we've not talked.
No, and well, I'm
But
just I'm just saying
the long and the
that
short of it is next time I host, give us a call. It's as simple as
yeah.
that. I'm there. I'm not going
And
anywhere.
also too, I don't really care who you talked to before. Don't care.
Look, this is a person I've been inviting to call since we hosted. I hosted
yeah.
Ethan Michael's show. This is how long it's been.
Oh my god! And Ethan just started doing back his YouTube shit this past couple months because he took 2 years off because of personal shit, and not gonna go into that right now. But the fact that it's been that long, because it was probably 1 or 2 years before, so it's been a while.
But anyway, moving on.
Moving
on.
Okay. I do want to ask you a question about your book.
Okay.
Because you mentioned that you were inspired. Were you inspired by Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World?
I read Carl Sagan's. Excuse me. I read
which
Carl
I
Sagan's,
have not read. I don't read.
I read Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World. I think to this day, it is the best book on skepticism available. It is brilliant. If you take kind of, there's 2 examples of brilliant skepticism and critical thinking. There's the stuff that Carl Sagan mentions in the Demon Haunted World, and there is someone help me out here because I forget the guy's name. The physicist who was on the board of the Challenger investigation. I forget his name. He is brilliant. He was brilliant. He's unfortunately, as Carl Sagan passed away, but he is brilliant. And what he did during that investigation,
Richard Feynman.
That's the one. And he is. What he did is in the face, and I use this as an example in the book. I'm not just rambling on here. I am actually relating it to the question you asked me. What he did is he, in the face of opposition, kind of stuck to his guns and really, really tried to get to the source of what caused that. And in the book, I use that as I do a comparison, and it's a comparison I've done on my channel before. It's not a new thing. I'm just kind of going into more detail into it in the book. And what he did was he kind of stood up in the face of adversity and really, really wanted to get to the bottom of this. And it didn't just do the surface level investigation. It really wanted to get into the bottom of it.
Right.
Now, what I do in the book is I contrast that, which was a genuine conspiracy theory within NASA. It was a conspiracy theory. NASA knew about the O-rings which caused the shuttle explosion. They knew that they were faulty. And they were told about it by the engineers the day before the launch, and they decided to launch anyway. And Richard Feynman uncovered all of this in the investigation. That is a genuine conspiracy theory. And then you can compare that to the kind of made-up conspiracy theories about NASA, like the Flat Earth movement, which just kind of go with this line of, well, they're hiding something. because we haven't got an explanation,
Right.
they're hiding something, which isn't a genuine conspiracy. NASA aren't hiding that the Earth's flat. It's just that you haven't got a good explanation as to why this information is out there, so you need to put the blame on someone because it contradicts your worldview.
It is the conspiracy of the gaps argument. like we don't have an explanation, so therefore there must be a conspiracy. It's just like, well, no. like I'm not saying that government conspiracies don't happen, because they absolutely do. But like when you go into like supernatural shit, that I'm just like, no, that's not what's happening. Like, or you start saying that like a lot of conspiracy theories lead back to like Jewish people. I tend to be like, no. Like there's, and I think that also like, but the fact that like, wasn't he like, they talked about him when they did Oppenheimer, like in the film. I think he was part of Oppenheimer. I can't remember. I was
Richard
very
Feynman.
stoned when yeah.
I'm
During the
not,
Manhattan Project.
I'm not sure, to be honest. It could have been. It's
No,
about
he was part of the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent he took part in that. That's beyond my knowledge scope, so I can't talk on that.
No, but I just find this whole thing very like this whole idea of, okay, like I'm gonna relate this back to the topic of your book. Okay, I'm going to bring it back. Okay. Also, I've had 2 glasses of wine. They're kicking in. So let's have that. So here we are. The fact that we're talking about perception versus reality. Okay. And the fact that someone was like, hey, let's talk about like, what is actually like, let's talk about like Jewish anti-Semitism and where does it come from? Like, where does this actually come from? Because I'm part of this, and I'm also a scientist that I want to understand why this happens. Okay. He was willing to do the uncomfortable work of looking at his own people and then looking at why people have a certain perception, kind of what Mel Brooks did through entertainment, but he did it through a scientific lens of like, why do you think that like Jewish people are like an enemy or like, subhuman? He was willing to do the hard work of actually looking at this. That is not someone that is like, kind of being like, well, I'm just a good person. Like, Jewish people are just like, complicated as the rest of us. We can all recognize that. He actually wanted to understand where anti-Semitism came from. That is not someone that is also Jewish that actually wants to understand it, because also if you really understand what that is willing to engage in arguments against it.
Yeah.
It's like me as a feminist. Like I really want to understand why people hate women. And I have a really good understanding of it. It's not because like I like engaging in it. Like it's not a comfortable feeling to understand why like certain groups of people hate women. But it's because I want to engage with other people to understand also, so I can break them out of it. Like, why do you hate women? Why? And having to engage in those really difficult conversations with people to a point. Yeah, I have my limits.
I think that, I mean, again, bringing it back to, I don't want to blow smoke up her ass too much, but since bringing it back to Cynthia, the conversation you had with Cynthia, I think you touched on privilege in that conversation, and I think as a white cis het male, we've got to. The way I look at this is, look, imagine this might be a bit of a quirky way of looking at it, but imagine you're playing a game of D&D and you're setting all your attributes with a 20-sided die. And I got
which
all
I
the
do
20s.
often because I'm in three D&D campaigns. I made a fourth that I want to run that I base on the apocalypse that I'm so excited to run. Anyway, keep going. Go ahead. So you mentioned my favorite thing in the world.
I in my privileged position in society got all the 20s. I got all the top
You got all the
attributes.
20s.
And it's like when you see people engaging in misogyny, racism, anti-trans kind of tirades and all bullshit like that, you kind of think, look, you're a person who's got you've rolled all the 20s, and now you're walking around and you're slaying your opponents in this campaign, and you're putting that down to your superiority, your brilliance, as if you have done something, when really all it is a roll of the die. That's all it is that's giving you these attributes and these abilities in this campaign. And
as Cynthia said, it was all about what that capitalist was feeling that day.
Yeah, and it's frustrating when you see people with that attitude, because they don't recognize this position that they've been been lucky enough to be born into, and they don't witness, or they don't experience, probably more correctly, those kind of behaviors which are so harmful to other people, and they're not putting it down. I cannot sit there and say I know what it's like for a woman to have someone being misogynistic towards her. I cannot say I know what it's like to be a black person and have people be racist towards them. All I can do is use my voice the best I can to kind of try and say to people, look, we are in a privileged position here. We're not in that position. Let us do our best to prop up these people who have not rolled the best dice as we have, and let them have their voice and let them have their say on stuff. And I remember once I was someone had commented. Go on,
Richard,
please go ahead.
have you ever been made to feel that you're less than a human being?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No.
All right. Wow. Okay.
And
but thank you for being supportive, regardless of that.
And I haven't had that experience. I remember once, I think it was Cynthia and Jenna Meal did a show.
Yeah.
And on that show, there was a comment in the comment section saying, "Oh, why do black people need an extra special voice? You know, why do atheist black people need to add the black bit on? Isn't it enough that you're atheist and you've got that voice on?" And I can't remember what I said, but I said something in response to that. And Cynthia and Jenna actually, on the next thing they did, highlighted what I'd said. And I can't remember the specifics, but they highlighted what I'd said and said, look, this is what an ally looks like. And that made me feel so good, because it allowed me to, in a situation that's so difficult to kind of support people authentically when you're not experiencing what they're going through, to have someone.
Have you ever been bullied when you were a kid?
Kind of, but not much, because I just kind of beat them up. I beat the bullies up. So I've honestly, hands up, Hands up, I've been very privileged in my life. I've
No,
really,
no,
really
that's
have.
fine. Like I was just asking because like my husband attributes to it to being bullied. You know, he's a cis straight white man. Like he got all the attributes that you can need, and he's also a musician and kind of like good looking. Like he got all the things, you know, and but also at the same time, he's admitted that he was like, you know, when I was bullied, I kind of developed that empathy. I don't think you need to like feel any sort of like oppression to be like empathetic and wanting to lift people up. Like I'm not saying that. I was just curious, you
Yeah,
know. If you develop going like I don't know why people are treating other people like they're shit, that's fine. like you got there, you're just like, well, I don't think this is right. You know, even as through a philosophical framework, you know, thank you for like getting there. And that's the whole point. You know, however you get there, you're just like, I don't think other human beings should be treated to feel like they're less than human beings.
yeah. I think we have to do. For me, and this applies over. It's not just about being an ally and stuff, but this applies overall. Kind of the conversations we have. I want to kind of treat people the best I can. And I don't want to speak for other people. I don't want to say to other people in this situation you should behave this way. I have a code of conduct that I apply to myself.
Yeah.
And I do the best to uphold that code of conduct. And you know, sometimes people agree with it, sometimes people don't agree with it. But I do my best to uphold that code of conduct that I apply to myself. I don't know how I have it because everyone knows that atheists have no ground substrate from which they can ground the morals in. But I do have a
I
code.
don't I don't know. I'm just like, just don't treat other people like shit.
Yeah,
like that's like, please don't do that. Like, and like to be fair, like when I tell you it's like I lost my shit on somebody, like I'm not doing it because I'm looking for approval. I'm just like, hey, by the way, I know I'm representing the ACA right now, but like I lost my shit. Like someone's being a bigot, someone's being a sexist. I'm sorry, I was not my best self.
yeah,
I was not reasonable. I was not calm. I was like, oh my God, you were being fucking terrible. And I'm going to call you on your shit. Because it's not just me. I'm on the ACA platform where I'm yelling at somebody for being racist or sexist or being like a terrible piece of shit. And that's why. I know you were like, no, Helen is fine, but I'm like, I'm just letting you know that I lost my shit
but
for someone being a bigot
let me just tell the
or
audience
being
because
sexist.
the audience might not be aware of what's going on here. So
Yeah.
the ACA has a TikTok platform and we go live on it sometimes. And Helen has been prolific at going live on it, and she has
Every Tuesday, 7 p.m.
every
Eastern
Tuesday,
time.
and she has been. You know, I've watched Helen grow from someone who would, and I'm not speaking out of turn. I don't think Helen. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
Someone who, when they first went on this, was not used to having these live debates. That you'd done a couple, but you weren't like you'd not done it regularly, and
No.
openly said to me, you know, because I kind of look after the ACA's TikTok thing, and Helen had openly said to me, I am nervous about this. I'm nervous about
Mm-hmm.
doing this. And, you know, we'd had a couple of conversations, and I have seen Helen grow so much doing that. I like when I kind of don't always get the chance, but when I can, I always because I get the privilege of being on there, of being able to download the lives after they've been done, so I can actually listen to them when they're not live anymore. So I do this on occasion. I listen to Helen's lives, and she's grown so much having these conversations. And you've got to, you can't hold yourself So you can't punish yourself when you lose your shit with people because it happens. I've been having these conversations for over 30 years. I started having these conversations when I was 14, 15 years old with religious people. In just in the streets, people who had stalls in the streets. That's a long time ago. I'm now 47.
I'm sorry, that was very sweet of you. Like, you gave me feelings. I'm
And
so sorry. I guess so
I
sweet.
didn't mean to be nice to you. Let's retract
No,
all that.
I'm sorry.
Helen's
Like, tell me I'm a
horrible.
bitch.
Vile.
Tell me I'm a bitch, and I'll be okay.
We I've been having these conversations a long time.
So
And
there was like someone last week said in the comment that I was better at this than a lot of people. Like, they just happened to mention it. They were someone that dropped into the chat, and I wasn't. I was talking to somebody and they said like she's better at this than most, and I was just like, I'm just talking. Like, but like I have become more confident in it, but also at the same time, like when I lose my shit, it's not because like if I was on my own TikTok channel, like fuck it. But the fact that I'm representing like us as an organization, I take very seriously. Even and the so I'm like, listen, I'm like, I lost my shit. Like, I'm, but like it's usually for a good reason I lost my shit. And but I'm like, hey, if there's anything you would like me to correct, let me know, and I will adjust. Um, and that's more where I'm like, if you hear something that you're like, Helen, like, yo, and I will adjust. But that's the point of me, because like I rely on people's feedback because I have my own perspective, and then I want someone, like, because I trust you or we're friends, I want that filter. And I think that because I hold myself accountable, and that's a good thing about like when you're on these online spaces is to have someone be like, I hear you and I trust you. Yeah, like you were right on this, but maybe you could do this as an adjustment. And I think that is a really good thing to do because what I think, especially in these online spaces like me and something we were talking about the other night, is that you can think that you are like right because like rejected a God belief, but also at the same time you might hold some really bad ideas that no one's calling you accountable for.
yeah, and it is important. It's terribly important to be able to hold yourself accountable, and
Yeah.
um, you know, I need it. I still need it after all this time. I still lose my shit with people after all this time, and I still need correcting after all this time. It
Right.
doesn't go
Yeah.
away. It doesn't go away, and I think the if you ever think it needs to go away, I think if you ever think that's it, I don't need correcting anymore.
Please
I
kill me.
know everything. I am now perfect. I think that's the time you need to hang your hat up and go home, because it's not good having that attitude. Um, and one thing I've done growing through, especially the online space. I've been in the online space uh, on video. I'm not talking about the old message forum days, but the kind of when we've been doing these live streams and stuff. I've been in this online space probably it's coming up to 5 years now,
It's a weird space.
and I think um, I've seen so much. I've gone through being kind of a newbie in this space to like I kind of now being one of the old guard in this space, and I see so many talented kind of people coming up. And don't get me wrong, there have been a lot of people who haven't had the talent, who've been given opportunities that they didn't deserve, who've been uh, outspoken for the wrong reasons, who've come through these spaces. So I'm not just blowing smoke up people's ass by saying, all these freaking new people are fantastic, because that's not what I'm doing. But I think there's so much, especially in the ACA now, there's so many voices that deserve that push to be heard, that have got so many good takes. I said on Discord on one of the after shows just a couple of weeks ago for Talk Heathen that AJ was someone who that's Wiz to Human in the chat, if anybody is not familiar. Just a year ago, I had no idea who that person was. And I have been so impressed with the way they've come up and the effort they've put in behind the scenes. Not just wanting to get in front of the camera and do the talky talk like
Yeah.
a lot of people want to do, but behind the scenes, and reached out. We've had conversations. We've talked about stuff, seen growth, seen brilliant takes, seen brilliant positions taken from them. Jimmy Jr. is another one who behind the scenes has really come out and been on
I'm very
fire.
excited for what he wants to do for the nonprofits.
Yeah, the fire in
Yeah,
that
like
guy's
we
belly is
like
amazing.
I'm like, who? Yeah, because like what we do, it's not the most popular show on the ECA because usually people but it's important.
Yeah,
Especially if you want to be in the skeptical activist sort of like sphere, or just trying to understand how religion affects politics because they keep fucking each other and they should get a divorce. like these are conversations that we need to be having, and the fact that he wants to take it into this direction, I'm all here for it, because like I'm not on the call-in shows. I'm not, I have to be on the experience, and I will have completed my trifecta. But regardless of that, the fact that I'm in the nonprofits, and also it helps me stay informed, but two, the conversations that we're having are really fucking important. Even though I think people like live debates, which has its place, and I'm not poo-pooing on that, but we have to be having more nuanced conversations about how religion affects all of us, even if you're secular. And that's that information that's a part of the new atheism movement. It's not so much debunking God, but looking at societal structures and how religion affects those things. Like, it's really fucking important to talk about those things. And a lot of people just say, like, well, if I reject the idea of God, everything falls into place. It's like, no, because even if you're not religious, it's affecting you. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that is such an important message to get across to people. I'm old, and I am very much firmly stuck in this field that I'm in, of kind of the old guard kind of stuff, of philosophy and religious studies, and talking about those aspects of things. I don't so much do the stuff which people like, and I'm going to name names here because it's important to name names and send people in the direction. People like Secular Rarity and Cynthia McDonald, and AJ's doing it with Ways to Human as well. These great people who are really putting social voices out there and like saying, look, this is a community, let's talk about this community and what we can do for each other. That's not necessarily my stick. I have my place, and that's not it. My place is the philosophy and religion stuff. But I love the fact that I've often talked about, when I've been on the shows, some of my favorite calls when I'm hosting are those where people want advice about coming out of religion. They've said, I don't think I believe in God any longer, or I'm coming out of God belief. Can you give me any advice? And we've got a host on, my co-host on the show, who has been in the same position as them, and I get to sit back and listen to that conversation, because I learn so much from those conversations without taking part. And it's the same with people like Jimmy Jr., as I've mentioned, Cynthia McDonald, Secular Rarity, AJ from Ways to Human, what you're doing on this channel, Helen. You've got all these great people who are really putting the work in, number one, because it's hard work to do this and make it successful.
It's not always fun.
And
it's not fun.
People who
like,
put in the
I just
work
want to watch Andor and play Elden Ring and D&D and not engage. And like my 4 rules for life: drink wine, hang out with my friends, play video games, and have orgasms. 4 things I want for my life. I don't get to do that on a regular basis because I have to fight against tyranny and fascism and bad ideas all the fucking time. And you're interrupting that. And that makes me sad because I want whatever you're have orgasms and playing video games thing looks like. I want that for you. And if it's, you don't get to do that, I'm sorry. I want you to be able to do those things. Because I'm doing my best on this little blue rock that keeps circulating around the sun. I'm doing my best. I just want you to be able to do your best too. And guess what? People say you can't do your best because of arbitrary bullshit. Cool. Let's have a conversation. And I think also too, you and I both agree, we don't really care what people believe in. It's what people do with those beliefs. I don't care. You can believe in Bob the Wonder Toast. You can believe that ghosts are sending you special messages, through your, through the radio. Cool. Great for you. Does that affect you telling me that I cannot have reproductive care? Because that's a different conversation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. At some point I will be gone from this space, and there will be the Jimmy Juniors and the AJs running round.
There'll be my weird crazy ADHD ass that I'm going to bequeath. We will bequeath of the throne of atheist YouTubers that were just hey, let's have a conversation. Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick, as I feel is exceptionally vital advice.
Yeah, I feel I think that's just to be a vibe everybody should follow. Don't be a dick. So, I've had you on for now 3 hours. So
yeah, you should know by now. And I think AJ will back me up on this when I say this. If you invite me onto a show, you're kicking me off. I'm not going off my own accord.
Okay, so I'm gonna let you go to bed. I'm sure your wife would like cuddles and bedtime, so I'm gonna allow you to do that. So chill your shit, and then we're gonna close down because also I have cast a feed and I have a D&D character sheet to work on for my my tiefling monk. I have to work on anyway. So talk about what you got going on.
Yeah, obviously we've been talking about the book I'm writing on the show quite a lot. It's in the early stage of writing. It's probably going to be a couple of years before it's all done and published.
I'm going to make that a bumper sticker, Miss Sequitur.
I have got a lot of people already chasing me for copies of this book. You know, I first talked about it publicly, I think, on recovering from religion, and you know, already then I had people chasing me up saying, "Well, when it comes out, you're coming back to talk about it. You've got no
Yeah,
choice."
like,
Uh,
yeah,
so
I
you
know.
know,
Mm.
there's that going off. I've got that going off, which is really important. Um, my big thing, my big thing, is producing Talk Heathen. It's no surprise. It's no secret, should I say, that I have been a fan of that show for the longest time. And getting, first of all, the opportunity to host the show, which came about after a debate with Dean Meadows, and some top brass being there and saying, you know what, you can be a host on Talk Heathen after all, after I'd been bugging them for a while to let me on there. And you know, then becoming the producer, getting to work with fantastic people. I think the majority of the hosts on the show now, people I've appointed on there. But even the old guard, I get to week in and week
You're
out.
gonna have me back
Listen to
on,
this.
Richard. I'm gonna like. I'll be so pissed if you don't have me on the fucking show.
Listen to this. I have got to work in week in and week out. I get to work with Christy. I get to work with
I
Objectively
know.
Dan. I get to work with Dr. Ben. I get to work with Jimmy Jr., Scott Dickey, Sidney Davis Jr. There's so many great
You
hosts
can't
on that.
mention all my friends.
I'm just in awe every week that not only do I get to work with these people, but I get to boss them about as well. It's fantastic. It's like the dream job. I love it. I really do love it. For those of you who
You're
don't
a
know,
very benevolent boss, by the way.
I can be. I can be. I can get my hackles up sometimes. I I was stood on a 2,500-year-old Celtic fort the other week. And we're talking about earlier on in the show about things that blow your mind. I was stood on a 2,500-year-old Celtic fort,
That's insane.
and you know, I was doing research for the other book I'm writing on the history of religion in the area in which I live, and this Celtic fort's 3 miles from where I live. So I was literally stood on the ramparts of this 2,500-year-old Celtic fort, and I got a video
Listen, I
call.
got there. There's a 400-year-old, 300-year-old fort, like 2.5 hours for me. So
Time's all relative, Helen.
I know.
So I'm stood on this ancient fort. I'm sort of what is the only what is believed to be the only urban Iron Age fort in Western Europe. I'm stood on the ramparts of this fort, and I get a call over a video call from Jimmy Jr. from the USA, and it blew my mind. This meeting of two worlds, that I was stood on the ramparts of this ancient fort, and I got like the what was when I was a child. This technology was only the stuff of Star Trek, and I'm getting a video call from the other side of the Atlantic. That blew my mind, and that, people, is literally what you get with me. That is what I am. I am someone who is. I have my mind blown regularly by really
Yeah.
simple stuff, which I consider exceptionally profound. But I love this space. I love what Helen does. Thank you, Helen, for doing what you're doing and continue doing it.
Oh
And I
yeah.
am going to shut up now and let you go.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. Please go subscribe to Talk Heathen. Just subscribe to all the ACA shows. Just do that. It's gonna make your life better. By the way, you're gonna come back. Actually, you'll probably come back on before your book releases, but we'll do a launch party, for when your book comes out. Also, as well, if you would like to be a guest or you know someone that should be a guest, email me here. Also like and subscribe. My friend Autumn Sword is going to be here on Monday. We're going to talk about conspiracy theories and Satanism. We're going to talk about that on Monday. And then other cool people will be here this week. Let me bring up my calendar so I know who's coming up this week. Let's see. And then Jason Freer is going to be on Wednesday. We're going to talk about actually BajaCon, which I will not be at, but we're going to talk about that. And then Graham Martin, the cross examiner, will be here on Thursday. So that's coming up this week on my show. Come check it out. Like, subscribe, do all the things. I am now going to go work on my D&D sheet and feed my cats. So, and Richard's going to go do cuddles with his wife and go to sleep. So goodbye, everybody. Good night. Be kind, give someone a compliment, and stay skeptical. And I will see you all here on Monday. Bye, bitches. Mwah. Oh, okay. Like now, wait, where's my thing? Okay, there you go. End stream.